function run by the Boys and Girls Club on the 2nd of February, so I'll pass these around. Anybody wants tickets? And we have some things to do in our pre-meeting. So let's get started. I guess this is yours, Carter, collection of financial interest disclosures. Oh, we need to, I didn't print that out and sign it, so.
I've got one for you. I'm not sure if everybody had the opportunity to look at, to print them here. To review the possibilities of any potential conflict with regard to the list of financial institutions that we as an organization do business with. If in fact you do have personal or other private business interactions with any of these financial institutions, we need to know that. Only by via of a check mark that would suggest that, and with your signature. And with that, we are in good stead with what the law would expect from us, from all of us. So, yes, sir, no problem. So if you have these that you haven't filled out, we do need them. If we can get them from you by the end of the night tonight, that'd be outstanding. Does anybody need a hard copy? Anybody? All righty. Well, that was all I had for that item, Mr. Mayor.
That's quick. Well, that's good because we didn't allot any time for it.
With regard to the next item, if I may.
Community promotions.
The tally is in with regard to your collective direction pertaining to community promotions. I left my spreadsheet upstairs. Do you have anything?
Yeah. Yes.
You will notice a couple iterations of the community promotions discussion in front of you in the form of this spreadsheet. The front of the spreadsheet here indicates what the total request was compared to what the average of your decision was. Now, if you'll recall, when we went through this conversation, a similar conversation regarding 1% and so forth, council came to the conclusion that if there were 5 votes supporting a particular direction on any given request, then that direction carried the day. With the proposition that you have in front of you here, it's just really another way of looking at how you could allocate these funds. Do they have the second spreadsheet? Or do you just have the one? Sorry?
She didn't.
Do you have the other half of this that shows the individual votes and so forth?
I do not have printed out copies of those. I can go grab some, but it is in the packet. So.
Oh, it is in the packet?
It is
okay.
in the packet.
Okay.
So each of the individual sheets is there.
So if you look at the other spreadsheet, you basically can see where the direction of the council, if you go by the 5-vote doctrine, would carry you with regard to a decision and each of these requests. So what we need tonight is whether or not you want to deliberate on it further, or if you want to carry forward on some direction with regard to each of the requests, or how you would like to do it.
Comments?
Could we postpone that decision until the next work session? Because I would like to look at it some more.
No
Because I didn't see it's in our packet for this meeting, or is it in the information packet?
It should be in the
The pre-meeting packet for this evening.
packet for this meeting. But as far
Well, I
as
didn't look at it. That's my fault.
Yeah, no problem. As far as I'm concerned, putting it off until next week is A-okay. If that's what council would like to do.
And we do have the option of changing the amount, but, for now, we're sticking with that, what is it,
21.9 is
21.9.
basically what we had in the budget, yeah. And incidentally, your second spreadsheet, if you went by that listing, would probably get us closer to budget than would the averaging method. Which again, the averaging method is really just meant to give you a barometer more than anything. Any other questions about community promotions? All right.
Deal with that in 2 weeks.
We'll put it on the agenda for next week.
Okay. Sole source purchase.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it is important for us to be sure you understand what we're requesting by way of a sole source purchase. And for those of you who may not have gone through this conversation before, this is the authorization that staff would seek when indeed we have a very unique purchase request that going out for the traditional bid and so forth doesn't make sense. Those of you who are continuing council members have heard this exact same appeal before, because we have asked for you to allow us to sole source purchase flight pumps in the past from the same group. If it pleases the council, I'd like Andrew to kind of go through that with us a little bit tonight as well, to refresh memories as well as to inform the new council people as to what this is all about, if I could.
Your Honor, Councilor Carter is right. Probably a year ago, we had almost the exact same memo, to be quite honest with you, to ask for pumps for the Begonia lift station. This time, we're asking for for pumps for Bar None Lift Station 1 and 2, which, as you might expect, is out in Bar None. 2 pumps, just shy of $80,000, but we have standardized our pumps in our lift stations to flight pumps, uses the same control panels and all the hardware and everything else that goes along with it, just so that we can mix and match. If one were to go down, we've got spare parts and knowledge base to be able to utilize the same equipment. So I'm happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Any questions for Andrew?
Just as a philosophical statement, if I may, Mr. Mayor, we really try to avoid sole source purchasing as much as absolutely possible. I don't want you to think that this is a routine that we go through often, because we try not to. In this particular case, where we do have multiple pumps that service the same system, it's quite possible you'll have this request come up again, because all of our pumps are kind of in that line of make and model. But I promise you, we don't like to do sole source purchasing, and we try to avoid it as much as we can. So.
And I appreciate you putting it on the pre-meeting, Carter, explaining that, because it's common when people see that to say, well, why isn't this put out for a bid?
Right.
And not put out for a bid because we bought a different type of pump, we don't have the parts, we don't have the expertise to repair them, we can't switch them out, there's good reasons.
Thank you.
We're just cruising tonight. Hopefully the regular meeting will go just like that. Amendment to the Plains RFP.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council got a real brief word of this when we were going through the agenda review last week, wherein the suggestion was made that the RFP that has been amended once might need to be amended again. With regard to the parking lot, again, you'll recall that we amended the RFP previously to include the south parking lot that we have historically kind of viewed as being potentially available to the public moving into the future, post-sale and everything else of the Plains buildings. Council said, well, why don't we tie that parking lot as a possible option to the Plains building portion of the building inventory that we are potentially selling to the private sector. The difference with the amendment tonight is that there is a distinct possibility that the livery building, which is actually on the other side of the block from the Plains building properties, could potentially have an interest in utilizing parking space at that parking lot as well, in part or in total. And so the amendment tonight that we're asking for your blessing for would suggest that not only the Plains building bidders could use that parking lot, but also the livery building bidders could use that parking lot also. And you may have the complexity of trying to figure out which portion of the lot should go with which building and blah, blah, blah. But at this point, we wanted to erase the doubt that the livery building could use that lot. Did I miss anything, Liz, on that? Okay. So that's really the question.
Questions? Comments about whether to make that amendment? Okay. okay with adding that?
What's that?
Did you need to step up?
Do I need to step out for this? I'm abstaining from this, so.
Okay, well, it doesn't require a formal vote, does it, John?
You know, I think that we were thinking, I think we touched base last week, and we just thought even for purposes of discussion, it would just be cleaner if he was able to step away.
Okay. All right. Okay, any other comments on whether we should add this? I think maximum flexibility is gonna get us the widest range of proposals.
So this is just that that parking lot could go with either of those buildings, or neither of them.
Right.
Or a combination of both. You know, it's we're trying to keep it as wide open as possible, I think.
Yeah, door number 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and do that then.
We will get that amendment out there then as a part of the RFP.
Ray, would you mind telling Steve? Okay. And the last thing is an agenda review for next week. Fleur, you have a draft of the grid, and as follow-up to my suggestion that we look at a different way of doing this, this is kind of the first effort to do so. So the new piece of paper is this: proposed work session agenda items. None of these are currently on the grid. That will be up to us to figure out where on the grid they go and when. So the way, if you go to the grid, you'll see that the February 12th agenda is set. But if you move ahead to the 26th, all of the items that were there were pulled off and put on this grid, so that on the work session next week, we will have a discussion of what will go on the work session agenda for the 26th of February. And we will also have a discussion next week of other items that council members think should be on our work session agenda. And we can add to this list at any time, and all it takes is 5 thumbs. So if you have things that you think council needs to address, we can always have that discussion in this pre-meeting or in the work session. I would advise against trying to make those proposals from the dais at the end of our regular council meeting. I think it creates the perception that it's a vote, just because that's what we do out there. So we can, but I would prefer that if people have things that they want to add to this, that we do it in this pre-meeting or in our work session when we go around. And we'll have an agenda planning section of each work session. So we'll just see how it works. So between now and then, think of things that you think we need to talk about. I've got some that I think I'd like to add, or at least suggest that we add. And so we can do that next week. Chris?
So, with all of that, anyway, we could talk about that position that Visit Casper was looking for on the outside promotions for CNFR at the next work session.
Is there room on the
Mr. Mayor,
on the 12th?
I think I thought we took direction to put it on the agenda for the 29th, and so you might see it on the 29th.
Well, that's the one I meant. That's the one.
Is that what you meant?
I'm
Okay.
looking at it on here, but I don't see it unless I'm looking right at it.
I think that was I think we took that direction, didn't we?
Well, I don't know if we formally did.
Okay,
Um,
okay,
I asked for it, but I think we might have just said we'll discuss it later, but
gotcha.
I was wondering if we could, if that's a.
I have no problem with adding it to the 29th. We don't have a lot there. Is everybody okay with just sneaking it in there? How much time do you think, 20 minutes or so?
Oh,
I
I'd
think
say at least 15 we probably ought to have.
Okay. And you were going to give us possible funding options?
That's correct.
Where we
Yep.
would get the money if we did decide to do this.
That's right.
Thanks for bringing that up, Chris.
And if I may, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Walsh, that was a $10,000 ask, is that right?
10,000.
10,000, okay. Yeah. We will work on that, absolutely.
Sounds good. Hey, we just tore right through that, didn't we? So, I want to talk a little bit about next week's agenda since we got started with that.
You asking me?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
We certainly
Sorry.
can. Yes,
Sorry.
sir.
Yes,
Absolutely.
excuse me, yes.
No problem. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I think we will finally be ready to talk about the event center audit next week, or in 2 weeks. Is that right? 2 weeks.
It's next week.
Next week. Gosh, my dates are getting mixed up. I'm sorry. Next week. If for whatever reason we determine that the audit's still not ready to deliver, we will make that known next week and ask for your patience and potential amendment of the calendar next week. But I think we're ready to go, and my hope is that not only we would have what we would share with you, but we plan to invite the event center staff as well as the auditing team to give us some insights into what they think is going well and what may still need to be worked on. So that's the plan for that.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that an internal or external audit?
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, that's actually, technically it's an external audit, but since we are a primary stakeholder in that, we do get that, and I believe we even pay that bill, don't we, Mr. Pitlick? For the audit for the event center?
Yeah, we do as part of the contract.
Okay, okay. So we are the owners of that audit, even though the event center is, of course, the.
But City of Casper staff aren't the ones it's an accounting firm that's
Oh,
doing that?
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I misread your
Okay,
question.
sorry.
Okay. Yes, it's definitely an outside auditing team,
Okay.
and as a matter of fact, it's the auditing team that does the larger city audit as well. So.
Okay.
And I will probably be a little late for that meeting because since our schedule was all delayed 1 week, my work schedule doesn't line up with the work session, so I'm probably you're gonna have to start the meeting next week. Because I couldn't adjust everything when we moved our schedule back on. So, okay. Anything else that people need to bring up? Take a little break before heading out there and let's see how all this goes tonight.
In case you want to take a look at it, that's the.
Thanks, everybody.
I now call the January 22nd, 2019 regular council meeting to order. Would council members please denote your presence by depressing your yes switch? Excuse me. The council would entertain a motion to, by minute action, excuse the absence of Councilman Hopkins.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Pacheco. Please cast your vote. Okay,
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
thank you. And just a reminder, the council meetings are televised and can be viewed on cable channel 192. I'm going to start the meeting a little different. Would someone in the audience care to come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Any brave person who wants to be our designated patriot tonight? Thank you, sir. Could we get your name, please?
Nicholas Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Wales. Whenever you're ready, sir.
I pledge allegiance
The chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the January 8, 2019 regular council meeting as published in the Casper Star Tribune on January 18, 2019.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Wall, seconded by Councilman Friel. Amendments? Or I'm sorry, Councilman,
It was me.
Vice Mayor Johnson, excuse me. You got that, Crystal? Okay.
Thank you.
Any amendments? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
The chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the January 22nd, 2019 bills and claims as audited by City Manager Napier.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Johnson, seconded by Councilman Huber. Please cast your vote. Or, excuse me, any abstentions? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
We're moving on to our bright spots in the community now. And this is Mentoring Month. And we're going to honor the big brothers and big sisters. And we have a proclamation to honor National Mentoring Month. Dave Branson is here to present the Greater Wyoming Big Brother and Big Sisters program. Would you please come forward, Mr. Branson, so I can share this proclamation with you? Good evening, sir. I'm going to abbreviate this proclamation because it has 7 whereases, but I think it'll get the point across. Whereas the citizens of Casper recognize that our success depends on helping every child succeed in school and reach their full potential in life, and realize that young people need a solid foundation of support that will help them become well-educated, confident, and productive citizens. And whereas thousands of Casper's children are in need of a caring adult mentor in their lives, and closing this mentoring gap will take more investment, partnerships, and volunteers ready to make a difference in a child's life. Now, therefore, I, Charles Powell, Mayor of the City of Casper, Wyoming, do hereby proclaim the month of January 2019 as National Mentoring Month in our community, and use this as an opportunity to raise public awareness of the importance of mentoring and encourage more citizens to help build a brighter future for Casper's youth through mentoring, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused the official seal of the City of Casper, Wyoming, to be affixed this 22nd day of January 2019. Before I give this to you, would you care to make any remarks, sir?
Well, just one, we'd really like again to thank the city and the council for your continued support of Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and it's great having the proclamation to just let us, all our citizens, know about the awareness of the great need we have for mentoring, because we know 1 in 3 of our children in our community do not have an adult mentor. And it's so critical for the success of our community and the health and well-being of our community. So we really appreciate your support very much.
And thank you for all you do. Would you come up to the front here, and we'll give this to you and get a photo shot? Are we good? Thank you very much. we are so blessed in this community to have people who volunteer to do good work such as this. And they often go unrecognized, so it's a pleasure to get to recognize this organization. Now is the time we invite any in the audience who wish to speak with the council to come forward. Now, I anticipate that many of you are here to speak about the Animal Care and Control Ordinance or the Liquor License Ordinance. Both of those are public hearing items, and we will ask for comment on these during the public hearings listed on the agenda. So if you would please wait until we reach that point, if that's what you wish to speak about. Anyone who wishes to come forward on another matter, however, this is the time that we have set aside for those comments. And if you would like to come forward, please state your name and address, direct your questions and comments to myself as mayor, and please no personal attacks on staff or council, and we will not respond to personnel matters. These will be referred to the city manager. And we hold people to a 5-minute limit for these public remarks. So would anyone care to come forward this evening? Okay, I guess we know what everyone's here for, the other two items, so, which is fine. And just to remind everyone, the reason we do this at the front of the meeting is so that people have a chance to comment on something before we cast a vote, and rather than have those comments after that. So, okay, please read the consent agenda titles.
Establishing February 5th, 2019 as the public hearing date for the consideration of the following 4 items. Item 7A1A, amending Section 10.24.010 of the Casper Municipal Code, which would be a speed zone near the Wyoming Medical Center. Item 7A1B, rezoning of lots 4 through 6, Block 19, Wyoming Industrial Park Addition, a replat of Block 19, lots 4 through 8, located directly south of the intersection of Foster Road and Salt Creek Parkway from PUD Planned Unit Development to M1 Limited Industrial. Item 7A1C, new resort liquor license number 7 for Avana Fund 1 or I LLC, doing business as Ramada Plaza Riverside Hotel and Convention Center, Casper, located at 300 West F Street to Casper LLC, doing business as Ramada Plaza Riverside Hotel and Convention Center, Casper, located at 300 West F Street. Item 7A1D, the transfer of ownership for retail liquor license number 36, owned by Urban Market Wines, LLC, doing business as Urban Bottle Wine and Spirits.
Thank you. Chair would entertain a motion to, by minute action, establish the public hearing dates just read.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councilman Huber, seconded by Councilman Walsh. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the Animal Care and Control Ordinance. Mr. City Attorney, do you have exhibits?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have one exhibit. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from John Henley to the Casper City Council and J. Carter Napier, dated January 9, 2019.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Council has had the opportunity to evaluate the concepts in this draft ordinance in preparation for the formal reading process of which you are starting this evening. Furthermore, Council has taken extraordinary efforts to try to collect public feedback as well with regard to a number of the concepts in this ordinance draft and proposal that will be continued this evening as a part of this public hearing. With regard to the concepts that are covered in this ordinance, one that stands out in my mind at least is with regard to the strengthening, if you will, of the leash requirements for pets within our community. The fact is that this ordinance does anticipate stronger leash laws, if you will, that will restrict the amount of animals that we see or have seen historically in our community, particularly in our parks, thereby creating a discussion sort of secondary to this relating to facilities and places where people can take their pets and run them without concern for the restrictions that might be brought forward with regard to this ordinance. Those ideas and so forth will not be the subject of tonight's discussion, other than perhaps through conversation that council might entertain. But the ordinance tonight really deals with issues pertaining to appropriate leashing, appropriate tethering, and things of that sort. A variety of issues, including those, I should say. With that, Mr. Mayor, I'd defer the floor back to you and your council.
Thank you. And would it be correct to say that we are no longer, if this passes as written, going to treat a leash as equivalent to voice control?
Mr. Mayor, I would probably put it the other way around. We aren't going to anticipate, if this ordinance passes as is, voice control as equivalent to a leash and that kind of thing. Again, if the language stays as it is.
Thank you.
You bet.
Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. However, I see there are a number of people here, and if a point is made that you agree with, I will allow people to come to the podium and simply state their name and address and say, I agree with the remarks made by the previous speaker, so that you can still be on the record without duplicating or without saying what we've already heard, okay? So that way everyone can have an opportunity to speak briefly. So I now ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the Animal Care and Control Ordinance to please approach the lectern.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, the reason that I'm doing this right now is at the end of when a person talks, the council always has an opportunity to ask that person questions. And so I just want to kind of ask this question of all of you who are speaking with reference to this ordinance. A question that I'm going to have in my mind is how anything that you are advocating for or against makes it safer for the people of the community and safer for the animals that we're talking about. And so it would be helpful to me and possibly to other members of the council if you would address those things in your comments, and then that way we won't have to ask each individual person blah, 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 the same question. If that's clear, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for letting me ask that.
Sure. Someone ready to come forward? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Linda Terrell. I reside at 2250 East 3rd Street. 2 years ago, my daughter, Brooke Aguilera, and I set out on a quest to change Casper ordinance with regard to animal welfare and safety. The quest was started because of 2 dogs in Evansville that were tethered 24 hours a day in a yard full of feces and garbage. Current ordinance states the dog is not tethered for more than 10 hours in a 24-hour period. The dog is in visual range of a responsible party. The dog is not outside during periods of extreme weather, including without limitation extreme heat or near freezing temperatures, thunderstorms, tornadoes. All this criteria was clearly not being followed by the owners of these dogs. We reported to Metro Animal Control on numerous occasions regarding the welfare of the dogs. We met with Metro regarding the dogs, brought it to the attention of the Evansville PD. Metro officers made many visits to this residence, to check on their welfare and reported to us that the dogs were healthy and there was nothing they could do. We were told there was no law being broken. We were told we would have to prove the dogs were tethered more than 10 hours in a 24-hour period. Our plan was then to video these dogs over a 10-hour period to prove that the tethering law was being broken. When presenting this plan to the Evansville PD, we were told that video could be altered and would not hold up in court. Now here we are at a crossroads. We have followed the law, gone to the proper authorities, the people who are in the position to help and protect. We were told over and over again there's nothing they can do. Their hands are tied. The only thing we can do is to change the ordinances. So we set out to do that. Brooke spent countless hours researching and working with a local veterinarian to come up with revisions to the current animal welfare ordinances with the hope of getting them before council. We met with Mr. Walsh, Mr. Henley, and Mr. Napier and presented our revisions, which not only address tethering, but also animals in hot cars, abandonment, shelter, inclement weather, and animals at large. My daughter reviewed the ordinance revisions that were presented to council at the November 27th work session. We are pleased to see the shelter requirements have changed, but believe there needs to be straw or hay or a dog bed required in a doghouse. The outdoor temperature change from 70 to 60, as well as tethering to 2 hours in a 24-hour period, are also positive changes. The ordinance does allow for the discretion of the officer, and that is a concern, as we believe the laws should be clear and concise, not allowing for personal opinion. There is a concern with regard to the ordinances being enforced, and we believe more education for our metro officers and the public with regard to the laws would be appropriate. Unfortunately, all of the ordinance revisions that were presented are not going before council. Our expectations were that our revisions would be presented to all council members. Inclement weather revision is not before you all tonight. We strongly believe there needs to be an ordinance in place to protect animals from the extreme weather we experience here in Casper. Abandonment by owner is not presented tonight. We are aware of many situations in which dogs have been left for days on end with no one taking care or providing them with food and water. In the revisions of 6.04.10, we presented abandonment by owner, failure to provide food, water, and shelter within 24 hours of Metro Animal Control notice that is posted in a conspicuous place. The animal will then be considered abandoned. If a neighbor or an individual is feeding the animal but has not been requested to do so by the owner or owners, the animal is considered abandoned. At the end of the 24-hour period, the animal is to be removed by Metro control officers and provided food, water, and shelter by Metro staff. We also want council to be aware that crucial elements of the current tethering ordinance were removed, and we are not aware of the reasons why. We've listed out the following that were removed under section 6.04.180, cruelty to animals, unlawful acts designated. We've made copies for everybody, rather than me reading through all of the ones that were left out, so we have copies for everyone, then we can get those to you. Also of concern is item I on page 17. The owner of every animal shall be required to provide such animal with sanitary living conditions by timely removing animal waste from an interior or exterior pen, shelter, yard, or other keeping area. All animal waste must be disposed of in an approved container. What is considered a timely fashion? Again, we feel that the laws should be more specific, clear and concise, making it easier for the APO to enforce the ordinance. Summing up our concerns, the removal of items from the tethering ordinance, abandonment addressed more clearly, inclement weather, and making the laws clear and concise, not as open to officers' discretion. We urge you to watch How Cold Does It Get in a Doghouse and How Hot Does It Get in a Parked Car by Dr. Ernie Ward. Both videos were emailed to council members and are also available on YouTube. Thank you for your time, and we hope you will give careful consideration to our concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Terrell. Questions? Any questions for Ms. Terrell? Thank you.
We have copies. I don't know if you
Yes, we can pass those around if you'd like.
give them to somebody.
And you did that in exactly 5 minutes.
Did I? Okay. I've been practicing. But okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good evening.
Dennis Steensland, 533 South Washington. I would like Carter to put this up on the screen for me. I don't have the same issues they do with this ordinance. My issue is that we've already spent 4 months leading up to it. Tonight's the first time it comes to the forefront. Anyway, 4 months going in, and you're just starting the process, and you're already starting the process of putting in a dog park. My concern, I guess, is it's too long of an ordinance. Most people won't read it, won't understand it. I just hope we don't continue to spend 4 to 6 months on this issue before we get it resolved. I don't have a dog. I don't have any concern other than that. And I've just been thinking about it a while. I see Carter wouldn't put up my display, so. What's up? No, that's the wrong side. So that was for Mr. Walsh and Mr. Henley. I saw that calendar at Christmas time, and I thought, well, I will bring that in for my friends on council, and that is my concern with this ordinance. We've had 2 or 3 ordinances in the past that the council has spent 6 months on, and as soon as the ordinance was passed or whatever done with it, that was the end of the people showing any concern for that issue. I'm hoping this one won't be the same way, but anyway, it's a lot of time to put on an ordinance. It's too lengthy and very hard to enforce. I don't know how you plan to enforce it.
Questions for Mr. Steensland? Okay, thank you, sir. Good evening.
Evening, Mayor Powell, members of council. My name is Angela Emery, and I'm the Executive Director of the Platte River Trails Trust. I'm here this evening because dog walkers are one of the biggest user groups on our community trails. The Platte River Trails Trust Board appreciates that fact, and we welcome it. We think our community trails are an excellent place for dogs and their human friends to get some exercise. It's good for everyone around. You also may be aware that we created a new dog park at the Tate Pump House and opened it last May. So further evidence that we recognize that people in Casper, the citizens, are looking for places to, have their dogs in a controlled atmosphere and to walk longer on the community trails. However, our community trails are also free to everyone, regardless of income, age, ability. In fact, when you go out on the trail, you will see people there from 3 to 103. You will see the mom with the stroller and the child next to her on the bike. You'll see grandma with the walker and maybe someone walking with her. There just are a variety of different users on the trail system. We also feel strongly that every trail user has the expectation of safety and enjoyment on our trails. That's very much in the top of our mind, that safety is key for everyone that uses the trail system. So we appreciate the city's recognition that the animal ordinance needs to be updated. And we would respectfully offer that we feel that it really needs to clearly and unambiguously state that dogs must be on leash at all times on our community trails. What we're enjoying right now is people, if you go up to them and ask them to put their dogs on the leash, they will say, I don't have to do that. All I have to do is have my dog under control, under voice control. Well, I agree that's what the current ordinance says, but that is a very subjective term, and who is to say that an animal at 8:01 will be under voice control, but at 8:02 might not. They might see a bird, they might see a rabbit, they might see a child running. It's just it's a real challenge for us, and fortunately and unfortunately, I see it every day from my desk out the window on the trail system. So I'm here on behalf of the board just to say, first of all, thank you for taking this issue up, number one. And number two, if you could strive just to understand that our community trails are for people from 3 to 103. We love our dog walkers, love our dogs, want citizens to have a place for their dogs, but everyone deserves a safe and enjoyable atmosphere on the trails. So.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Emery? Councilman Bates.
On the trail by the river, by the pump house, isn't there markings that says your dog has to be on leash, or doesn't it say that?
It does.
Okay.
But a warning or a sign does not, in effect, give us any ability to enforce that. Only you as the city can be the enforcer. We can be educators and advocates for safety and dogs being on the leash, but only you can do the controlling.
Councilwoman Lutz. Other questions for Ms. Emery? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else to speak in favor? Good evening, sir.
Good evening. I'm Ken Schaefer. I live at 232 South Lennox here in Casper, and I agree with her completely. There's way too many dogs running off lead, and we need to enforce that. When Councilman Walsh first brought this forward on the paper, I called him and we talked about it. I don't know if you remember me.
And several of you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and we talked about enforcement. We have this law, never been enforced. if we're gonna go through all this, we need to enforce it. We need to let people know that this law will be enforced, and it'll take care of itself. I get fined, I'm gonna tell my friend, hey, I just got a $50 fine for walking my, eventually, people will start walking their dogs on lead. But if there's no punishment, nothing will work. It's like that, the picture of the dog just showing, walk any of the parks, walk the trailways, see how much is out there. A lot. Volunteer, it doesn't work. It only works if there's a punishment to it. Or it's like speeding. If I speed, I get a ticket. If the law goes away, I speed. It's just, to me, that simple. We have to enforce it somehow. Whether we use our meter maid to walk these parks, if we hire another metro to walk these parks, our police officers get out and walk a park. It doesn't have to be daily. Just randomly we'll get it done. And a few fines will make that point quickly. So anyhow, thank you for your time. I appreciate you bringing this up. It's a can of worms, but we need to fix the can of worms. I'll get them all in one can. So.
Thank you. Questions from Mr. Schaefer? Okay, thank you, sir. Anyone else to speak in favor? Good evening, sir.
Nicholas Wales, 906 East 17th Street, Casper. I'm in favor and kind of curious as to how it's all laying out. I'm in favor of having the leash law on the trails. I've taken my dog to the trails over by the pump house, and I've let him play in the river. I take him off certain parts of the river. I take him off the leash. He's focused on me, the ball, and only that. If somebody goes by, I've been yelled at before for not having him on the leash. He's in the water. He pays attention. The whole world can blow up. He ain't gonna know. It's playtime with him. We're on the trail. The leash is back on. It sits in my pocket the whole time. Certain places, I understand years ago, you guys came up with the city did, that as long as it's a fenced-in area, it will be on a leash 100%. And I remember that, like if you go to schools, other parks, you want that animal to be on a leash, you'll never hear me complain about that. I want to see that, and I appreciate it. I take my dog to Washington Park a lot. I will walk up there, usually, but the leash is going to be with me. Not always on a leash, but he stays right next to me. Sometimes it's with, sometimes without. But once I'm in that park, that leash is off. It sits right there with a water bowl, food, his toys, and we play back and forth half hour, hour of chasing that ball, frisbee, whichever we bring with. Am I supposed to have a leash on him the whole time there? Are we going to have at least an understanding as to what is going to be allowed to have a leash, what's not? He's under voice. When I'm playing with him, that voice is there. It's only me. Other people have come up, from little kids to older people. They want their kids to throw the ball. He'll go get it. He's fine with it. Not every animal is the exact same way, and I'll agree. Some are vicious, some aren't. Some are playful, and when mine's done, he'll stay. He'll stay out in the middle of the field. I can get him and get again. I'm just going to stay here. Don't throw it. But I'd like to understand that if the leash law does also mean under voice command, then that's what it'll also be, so that there's not going to be any problems with that if I actually have my animal with me. So I understand that, when you guys are done with this, how clear is it going to be as to where it's going to be required to have a leash and under voice command also at the same time. And for those people that don't, I screw up, I'll take the fine. I'll eat it. That's my fault. And with people not cleaning up their animals and their dog waste, that's part of the responsibility. We have to take care of our own human kids. We have to take care of our pets that we consider as humans, and fine them. Make the fine a lot bigger, not 50. Make it a whole heck of a lot bigger. It's only going to take so many times for someone to go, okay, I'm done with this. They may forget their wallet, their keys, but they're going to remember a doggy poo bag before anything else once they leave the house with that pet. But there's a lot of things like, that's where my only disagreement is, the voice and the leash part. I'll agree with everything else.
Okay.
I'm done with that.
Questions for Mr. Wales? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening. Megan Schaefer, 232 South Lenox. Yep, we're related. So I appreciate the council taking this up. I have asked previously the last time I spoke, so I didn't see any changes, so I'm going to ask it again, and I actually have some ideas. In the definitions, number 7B4, that prohibits, it defines a dog as being at large on any city, golf course, or cemetery. As I've mentioned before, I have 2 children buried at Highland Park, which is a city cemetery. I go visit them. I go visit them with my dogs. I'm currently breaking the law every time I do that. Even though my dogs are on lead, they're not running all over, they're not harassing the wildlife in the cemetery, they're not having any eliminations in the cemetery, they're not running over people's graves or being disrespectful in any way. So I would like to suggest that you consider changing that to allow a provision that someone such as myself, I suspect I'm in the minority, this would not affect a lot of people, but be allowed to apply for a permit to have my dogs with me when I go to visit my children. I don't think it would be expensive. I would still have my dogs on leash. The permit could define that, and it wouldn't be that much different than the permit that you can apply for dog shows and exhibition and that, which is addressed further down in this law. So I would like to suggest that you add that as an option for the people who might be affected by that. It could be something that would be a one-time permit, or it could be something that was renewed annually. If it was a one-time permit, that would make the paperwork pretty easy. And so I would like to really strongly request that you allow that. The other thing that I think is important.
Could I enter for a second? What was the line number again?
It is 7B4. It's in the definitions.
Okay.
It defines a dog as being at large if they are,
Large definition.
if they are in, if they are present. It doesn't matter if they're on leash or not. They're considered at large just by their presence there.
Okay, thank you.
And 73.
Oh, what line it is? I'm sorry.
I think we found it.
Okay. I would also like to suggest that 6.04.010, definitions number 8, the definition of attack is too vague. It sounds like you intend to include menacing behavior, but that is also very vague. Unless you have good knowledge of dog behavior, this could be really problematic to enforce. For example, let's say a dog gets away from its owner and comes running over to me and my dogs who are on lead, and my dogs growl at that dog. Who do you think is the aggressive dog? You might think my dog is the aggressive dog because that's the one growling. Wouldn't that seem logical that that's the aggressive dog? But in fact, the dog that came running and charging into my dog's space is the one who's being rude, and my dog is actually saying, hey, that's rude, stop doing that. So my dog is not the aggressive dog, but it could be labeled that way. So I think that contrary to the gentleman who spoke and said 4 months or 6 months is too long, I would actually say that it would really be great to do your best to get it right, and that takes time and not rushing. So I think that that bears looking at a little bit further. Regarding Councilman Huber's question to everyone, how will this leash law make anybody safer? Well, one other thing. Voice command, I would take it out. If you want it to be enforceable, it needs to be black and white. And I might say I have voice command and control of my dog, and the gentleman who spoke earlier might. But there are situations where he might not. And I know that he doesn't believe that there are. But I know someone, her name is Susan Garrett. She's a world famous trainer. And one of her dogs was killed. It was run over because it got out of the car. It was loose and it was run over. You cannot train for every situation that your dog might encounter. And if you can't do that, then you don't know every situation is under control.
I'm sorry, 10 seconds, please. I should have given you more warning.
That's fine. I think that's all I have to say. I would not add voice control. I would have, they're on leash, everywhere.
Questions for Ms. Schaefer? I have one. Do you have a suggestion for us as far as how to define an attack?
I think you're going to have to look at that really carefully, because I think that you do want to include menacing, but I'm not sure. That's a question you all will have to answer. Attack, very clearly, I would say, is if there is any contact. Physical contact could definitely be a very clear definition of attack. But are you wanting to include menacing? That could be problematic. But
Any other questions from Ms. Schaefer?
Mr. Mayor, if I
Councilman
may,
Huber?
ma'am, talking about that definition of attack, in your mind, would it make that any more clear if instead of saying, as this current proposal is, attack means an aggressive or violent action, if that said means any aggressive or violent action?
well, I think any aggression, how are you going to define aggression? That, I think, is where you run into a bit of a problem with that language. Because in the scenario that I gave you of a dog running over to my dog, and I've had this happen at Highland Park, not the cemetery, but at the park. I was walking one dog, and I had somebody actually send their dog to my dog. He sent him to my dog. He had a shock collar on this dog. He was up at the parking lot. I was down at the football fields. And he sent this dog to my dog. My dog did not react, but I didn't have any way to protect my dog or myself from this dog. I did not take it as an aggressive act, but I told him to call his dog repeatedly. He refused. And when the dog got within a close enough distance, I had my dog on a flexi, so I had just locked the lead so I could throw the handle at the dog. And when I raised the handle, he shocked the daylights out of that dog. Well, the dog whimpered and ran exactly the other way, not back to the person. But would you describe that as aggressive?
I would.
See? That's, I would describe it as an idiot that I'd like to go assault. There it is. Sorry. My dog is not for somebody else to train on.
Mr. Mayor, ma'am, I have to tell you a short story. I'm very sympathetic about what you're talking about at the cemetery. After my parents had died and their remains were buried up there, my sister and I went up there once and had their little Australian Shepherd with us. And Queenie got out of the car, had never been to the cemetery before. She jumped out of the car and she went straight over and sat down where their remains were buried. And so I understand what you're talking about, taking your dogs up there.
Well, for many people, they're part of our family. They're not property. And, I'm not willing to take a risk with their health and their well-being to find out if somebody else actually truly has their dog under voice control.
Okay. Other questions from Ms. Schaefer? Okay, thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor? Good evening.
Hello. My name is Andrew Zauslonsky. I reside at 1441 Hazelwood Drive. And I wish to express my approval of a stronger animal control ordinance, and certainly one that includes 100% leash law that does not include voice command as an adequate means of control in public. My family and I have unfortunately had multiple negative interactions with pet owners in Casper. During these interactions, we have felt threatened and intimidated by pet owners who have completely refused to comply with existing law. Our small children, who are ages 4 and 1, have been present during these interactions. These interactions have included abusive language directed at my family, even in the presence of animal control officers who are simply explaining the existing city ordinance. We have had dog owners allow their animals to approach and sniff our baby while in her stroller, assuring us that they are good dogs and we don't have anything to worry about. We have had dog owners allow their animals to wander off of their property and approach us on the sidewalk with no concern that their animals were no longer under their control, leash, or voice command. And as the City Council has recognized, Casper has a problem with animal bites. And I thank God that none of our animal encounters have resulted in a bite so far. However, I think that animal bites are the inevitable result of irresponsible owners who feel that the rules do not apply to them, and that they are better judges of safe animal practices than animal control professionals. I believe that stricter measures and more meaningful consequences for those who ignore the law are necessary in order for the city to ensure the safety of its residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Zawinski?
Zawinski.
Okay. I'm not going to try it again. Questions for this gentleman?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Weaver.
Sir, when you described a dog coming up and approaching your child in the stroller, you know, are you advocating that, for instance, under where it defines public nuisance means any animal is considered a public nuisance if it, and there's a laundry list of things there, would you consider that if there was language in there that said that an animal approaches someone in an unwelcome manner, or what would you propose to remedy the situation of what you're talking about, the dog coming up to your kid's stroller, or do you think that just if the dog was physically on a leash, that would be adequate to address that?
I would actually like to see a specific mention of children who are very young, just because a dog running up against my legs is not a huge threat, but I know in some of the articles I've read in the paper surrounding this issue and some of the information presented by the City Council before, there have been instances of dogs even biting babies who are carried by their mothers. And so I feel that they're the most vulnerable ones, so I would really like to see some specific language addressing that. And yeah, I think unwanted violation of the personal space of an infant or toddler, I think, can turn deadly very quickly if the dog is triggered in the wrong way. So I would like to see that addressed specifically.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hello, Councilman. My name is Bruce English. I live at 3761 Carmel Drive in Casper. I'm also a board member of the Platte River Trails. And I've been in correspondence with Charlie and I'm not sure all who, but I'm all in favor of the way you've addressed the ordinance. The way I read it, I don't believe I saw any voice control included in there. What, did I miss that, or it's not in there, is it? Which I think is very important. I'm very sympathetic with this gentleman that has control of his dog and can play ball with him in the park and things like that. He's not the problem. It's problem dog owners that are. And I think we need a firm ordinance that states they must be on leash. And I'm sympathetic with him. I hope he doesn't get a ticket for playing ball with his dog in the park, but he's not really the issue. I think this law ordinance is meant to address some other people, the problem people with the dogs. We really think it's very important that they be on leash on our trails. We've had several incidences of people getting injured from bicycle pet conflicts, those sort of things. And we live up on Carmel and back onto the creek down there, and there's a resident deer population in town, as I'm sure you're all aware. And we see the most well-intentioned people lose their dogs to chasing deer. And I don't think there's a voice control exists for most dogs when a deer comes by. And I think if you look at most professionals, policemen, any kind of dog handlers, always keep their dogs on leash. They're not about to run the risk of a valuable animal being off leash and getting injured. So I congratulate you. I've read through the ordinance. I think it's great, and I'm all in favor of it. Thank you for being very thoughtful with it.
Questions for Mr. English? I have one. Mr. English, how do you feel about someone unleashing their animal to play in the water while they're on the trail?
Similar issue to the gentleman playing ball in the park, I think. Technically, I guess it shouldn't be allowed. If it's a good dog owner, I don't think it's going to present a problem, and I don't think it'll be an issue. But I think the ordinance needs to state that they need to be on leash.
Any thoughts on how we would distinguish between a good dog owner and a bad dog owner in those circumstances?
Difficult. I don't think you'll have a problem with the good dog owner.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. English? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I would have one. Mr. English, you're on the Platte River Trails thing, and in that capacity, do you guys have any feeling or position about the, you know, whether, in that Whitewater Park along there, you know, there's some turbulent rapids if the river's running real good, you know, if that's, in your opinion, or if you feel not qualified to venture an opinion, that's okay too. But if you think that that's safe to be sending your dog out into the turbulent water features there to fetch a stick, a ball, or whatever, or is that more appropriate, for instance, up at Murad Park where the river's not quite so turbulent?
I don't think I'm qualified to venture an opinion on that. We are involved with the river safety campaign and very interested in river safety. And I would not advocate anybody play in that river without life preservers on, person or dog, if it was going to take my advice. I don't know that I'm qualified to give that advice, but that's what I would. I have life preservers for my dogs when I take them out in my kayak. I don't know. I just wouldn't want to make that distinction, I guess. It is hazardous there by the pump house for sure. There's been problems there, and that's why we partnered with the Casper Fire Department on the river safety campaign and continue to do that. It's been very successful. We're building some more life jacket stands. So great program, and I'm not, other than that, I don't know if I'm qualified to venture those.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Anyone else to speak in favor of the ordinance? Good evening.
I'm Wendy Schutz, 526 Lind Avenue. I am in favor of the ordinance. I have a couple of questions. First of all, back on the aggression, when she was talking about it, I can understand it being vague. I need some tightening, and I would suggest even looking at some of the bigger cities on their definitions. But I had a case where I was walking down the alley with my dogs and had two dogs rush their fence, their own fence, and try and come over. And when the guy came out, he told me to get away because the fence would not hold them back. And it was my fault to be in his alley. And so to me, those dogs were aggressive, and I was more concerned if I was a little kid playing in that alley, what would have happened. I did call the police because the guy also said he wouldn't let the dogs come out at me, and I took it as a personal threat. Nothing else was done. So I think there does need some more definition on attack, maybe at large, or, you know, verify that this is all dogs, any place, and information on that. I know you said most of the discussion is on the tethering and everything, but a question came up to me not too long ago on the license, where it talks, this is line 277. Why do we are no longer able to buy the licenses at the veterinarian offices when we get our rabies? It's always been so convenient, and I think people are, okay, I'm getting the rabies, let's get this done, taken care of, the dogs are licensed. Now we have to go back up to Metro to get the dogs licensed. And I'm sorry, that wasn't on my list to do, so it didn't get done right when the rabies were bought. And I think then the city's losing an opportunity to have more dogs licensed timely. The money's taken in by the vets. I know maybe there's a bookkeeping problem, but I don't know if all of a sudden this ordinance was to be followed exactly, but the convenience for the dog owners have been lost, where we were able to, the last few years, buy the licenses at the same time as we were getting all the vaccinations for our dogs.
We'll be sure to address that during our discussion.
Okay, and then there's been some discussion about children, strollers, and everything else. Believe me, I am a dog lover. but I'm also a responsible person. I have people approach me with their children all the time in situations that I would never have put my children in. There's got to be some personal responsibility by people with children, by people that are out in the public. If you don't like dogs, don't go to the parks where dogs are allowed off leash. If you're concerned about your children in strollers, don't come up behind someone with a dog, be it on leash or not. So I just want to say, I like the ordinance. Please don't think that you have to tighten this down so much that it's going to cover every situation. There still has to be some personal responsibility on the people with the dogs and the people that are interacting with people with dogs. One of the comments that was made was just an understanding that anyone on the trails should have their dogs on leashes. I think we need to verify then, because this has come up in the past down at Murad Park. I've been approached saying, no, you're walking on the trail, you need your dog on a leash. And I'm saying, no, I'm in Murad Park. It's okay to have the dogs off leashes. And it's been arguments, and I don't know if you guys remember several years ago where a mistake was put as a public announcement on the radio of, if you're on the path, the dogs have to be on leashes. So let's make sure that that's understood, that still at Murad Park, inside the park, the dogs do not have to be on leashes. Even
1 minute,
around the
please.
park. There again, some of the question about good owner, bad owner. I think, and I'm not trying to answer for Bruce, but if no one's complaining about someone that's playing in the river where no one else is at, and you can still walk the path, if they're not going to complain, let's hope we just don't have people calling and saying, come give this person a ticket because I saw the dog off leash. I mean, there are times that a dog gets away, or even going in and out of your car, be it the park or at your house, just because someone sees the dog at large for 5 minutes. I don't think that should be something that enforcement has to deal with. So I just want to say thank you for giving us this chance to go ahead and give public input.
Okay. Questions for Ms. Schutz? Okay, thank you. Anyone else to speak in favor of the ordinance? There being no others to speak in favor, I now call those forward who would like to speak against the ordinance or in opposition. Please approach the lectern. Good evening, sir.
My name's Mike, 742 North Jefferson. I did this a couple times already, and I think I've sent you guys some emails. And there's one thing that hasn't been brought to the attention of the folks, and that's people that are disabled. It is very, very dangerous for some disabled people to walk their dog on a leash. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. People that only have one leg, people that there's all kinds of different scenarios that would benefit with something in this ordinance saying that if if you have a respectable pet owner and he has his dog completely under control at all times, a leash shouldn't be required if it's unsafe for him and the animal.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Sir, sorry. Councilwoman Lutz.
So I guess, and honestly, I'm curious. So what would be your proposal of how we, because I mean, unfortunately, I think we'd run into the part of we don't want to be too vague or ambiguous, because we're obviously trying to get that weeded out here on other issues. So what suggestions would you have for us in that scenario?
I would suggest personally that if I was going out walking the dog and I would have something saying that it's all right for me to do so when I get pulled over or whatever. That's all it would take. I lost my puppy a few months ago because he got attacked by a pit bull. And I think that is the issue that this council should be I think the laws themselves are fine the way they are. It's just that they need stronger penalties for people that are not taking good care of their animals. And I don't want to pick on pit bulls, but I'll tell you what, that's one of the breeds that's not even a dog. It's it's just a monster. Yes, it needs to be on that particular breed, and there's several others that need to be leashed at all times. My little puppy was about this big. He was 2 years old. I trained him from when he was that big, with his eyes still closed, and I had no problem controlling him any time.
Were you ever able to bring him to one of the parks that's set aside for dogs that are not on a leash?
Yes.
Morad or Mackenzie? Did
Yes.
that work for you?
I used to, for those 2 years, we traveled the walks, the river walks, each and every day.
I'm talking about the areas that are specifically set aside, like Morad Park.
The wife that used to do that.
Was that safe for you?
It was, but there's for me, it wasn't freedom for the dog and I to be inside a fenced area and just go around and around and around. The wife did it, but I didn't very, very often go with her.
Any other questions? Councilman Bates.
This is for you, Ms. Henley, Mr. Henley. Would that follow under, I'm trying to find it in here and I apologize, I cannot. Regarding the permit for, what is it? Service dogs. Would that, for a vet, somebody that is disabled that needs a dog, cannot have a dog on a leash but needs a voice command, would that follow under that permit with the service dog?
Most service dogs that I've seen have leashes on. Almost all of them. In fact, I don't think I've ever, you ever seen one? Didn't.
I think the question was addressed to Mr. Henley.
And Councilman Bates, I do believe that, in fact, most service dogs are controlled by leash just because of the fear that if something would happen to them, they're very valuable dogs. And as far as this particular hypothetical, the dog has to, under federal law, provide some type of service that is associated with a disability. And so that would be more than, I think, just being kind of a comfort dog. So the likelihood is that that would not be, at least in my mind, a proper use of a service dog, unless the dog was actually doing some type of a function that would help the individual maintain their walking on the path because they don't have the sight or they don't have the stability. So maybe they would help them with that. So typically that would not be the case, that a dog could be used simply as a comfort dog and be off leash because the person has a disability.
But to qualify as a service dog, they have to go through a specialty training and certification program. Is that correct?
Actually, they don't have to have any particular certification. Most of them do. Most of them do because it requires special training to help a person with a disability. And of course, the people rely on them greatly. And so they want to make sure that they are well trained and well able to do their job. But it's not a requirement under federal law that you have to have a particular type of certification.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for the speaker?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Weber.
Mr. Harrison, is what you're basically asking for would be like kind of like a handicap parking permit, that the person with a particular need such as yours could come and apply and say, hey, I need an exemption from this leash law because I just, it's going to injure me if I try to leash my dog or something like that. I think you're understanding my question. Would that something like that satisfy what you're concerned about?
Yes, Councilman Hewer. Yes, that's exactly what I was.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people out there that I see walking without leashes that I wouldn't want to try with. People with crutches, people with canes.
Okay.
Well,
let me play the devil's advocate for just a second here. And, what if somebody were to say, well, okay, if you can't physically restrain your dog, then that's maybe even a bigger argument that the dog needs to be restrained. Are you tracking? I'm just wanting to play the devil's advocate on the other side of what you're asking for. If somebody says, well, it's too bad that this guy can't safely contain his dog, but that's not everybody else's problem. What would be your response to that?
I would say, especially on the trails, I had different things that I could words that I could use for the dog, and the dog would obey to get over to the side or whatever. And when you're walking and you only got one leg, your focus is on that. You try to keep track of things around you and on and on and on. But it's so hard for you to try to put them miles on. It takes a lot more than what it would for yourself with two legs. So you're concentrating on that, and you're not, and you're not. You're hoping you don't get injured, you know, because you're walking fast and.
Mr. Harrison, I think we will go ahead and have that be part of our discussion. I think there's some interest in exploring that possibility.
Okay,
So,
I sure do appreciate it.
thank you. Anyone else to speak against the ordinance? Good evening.
Mayor Powell, Council, I'm Ken Cazzola, 4830 Estes Court, Casper. I really not speaking against it. I see a lot of good features here, but on I think it's 7. I'm not sure. We just did a little brief printout, but it talks about the hours that for using the parks and so on. Now, I don't go to the park. I go to Murat, or else I walk my dog on leash on a trail. But I'm just thinking, when we're at Murat, we notice that by 4:30 it's dark in the winter time. So you're really, for a big part of the year, 4:30 to 6, you're putting people in the dark, and I don't know how this is going to go over.
Sorry, Councilman Walsh.
So I believe are you referring to where it had times where they could be off leashes in certain places?
Yeah.
That's been removed, so those off-leash times are no longer in the current ordinance that we're looking at.
Okay. Okay.
And that was part of the feedback that you got in the revisions.
That's correct.
Yes.
Could you explain that again one more time? Maybe I missed something.
Through the feedback process that we had, that was one of the issues, and that was taken off. So those free times, if you will, but in the morning and in the afternoon that were in one of the drafts have been taken out. So there's no longer an opportunity or free time during the day where animals can walk off leash.
Oh, is that right? Okay, okay. I guess I was just going by a copy that maybe I wasn't clear on. I did want to just kind of double check. You know, we have attack on item 8, and it says it's an action. Then here we have aggressive, and it's, you know, it talks about threats, but not a physical action. Is that correct?
We'll have to look at the language. I'm not on that section.
It says attack means an aggressive or violent action against a person or animal.
Okay.
It says it's line 75.
Okay, I'm kind of going with limited info, but I'll take, you know, that's what I'm trying to get clear.
And definitions.
I haven't seen the revised ordinance, to
Okay.
be honest with you.
I don't know that definition has been changed, has it, Councilman?
No, that definition of the attack hasn't been changed, and the attack is an element of the vicious standard, so it's not a standalone. But if when we get done with this discussion, you can have my copy that I'm looking at here.
Okay.
I guess the question comes up, if a person is attacked or if there is an aggressive dog, if you're at, say, Morad or at the pump house park, which is probably unlikely, it's more likely to happen at Morad, which law enforcement agency would enforce that? Who would you contact? Because I've been told that the city police won't go to Morad, and is that something that the sheriff would be responsible for, or how would you go about enforcing?
Murad is a city park, Councilman.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. Murad's within the city limits. Police department would be the point of contact, and they would likely send an animal protection officer.
Okay, that's good. And then there's previously a discussion about the lady that talked about going to the cemetery, I believe, and dogs came rushing up to her, and you know, and saying that they have to be on leash. Now, for Morad, I'm assuming that you're expecting dogs to go up to each other, and is there going to be any stipulation as far as consequences in that regard?
This is your area. Go ahead, Councilman.
That would, so if they ran up and they engaged, if they attacked another dog, then it would fall under the vicious animal. If there was casual contact and that kind of thing, like you see a lot with the off-leash locations, then it wouldn't be a crime.
Okay, yeah, I've got a 20-pound dog that likes everybody and everything, and he does, you know, so to speak, get into other dogs' face. But I'm just kind of wondering if, you know, that wouldn't be considered aggressive or anything like that.
I don't think so.
I just don't want the law to be to the point where dogs can't interact, but if they do, you know, you take them there so they can be off leash, and you expect them to be dogs. So you can't have them under control every minute.
Okay.
But if a dog does respond aggressively, then, you know, maybe that dog shouldn't be in that particular park.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Cazzola, is that correct?
Excuse me?
Mr. Cazzola, is that correct? Did I get your name correct?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. That's okay. Any other questions for this gentleman? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else to speak in opposition? Good evening, sir.
Rod Tallet at 1722 Westridge Circle. A gentleman brought up specifically pit bulls. I don't think the issue is the pit bull. I think the issue is the owner. I've had my dogs aggressively attacked by mastiffs, by German shepherds, and by other types of dogs. I have 2 pit bulls, and they run behind me. They don't want to fight. So I just want to make a point that pit bull should not be the focus of that statement.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Thank you. I think, to quote Councilman Walsh, we don't have a dog problem, we have a people problem. Is that?
Yes, we do.
Is that a correct quote, yes. Councilman? So, anyone else who wishes to speak in opposition? There being no others to speak for or against the ordinance, I now close the public hearing. Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance, please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 6.04 of the Chapter of the Municipal Code, Animal Care and Control.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Bates. Discussion.
Yes, sir.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to address a lot of the concerns and areas that people brought up. And when we started this process, and Mr. Steensland's right, several months ago, because this is clearly an impactful change, right? So why would we rush into that? If you remember the original ordinance that was out there. This has been changed considerably, and it's been changed considerably by people's input. And as we started out, it's not going to cover all of everyone's concerns. But to touch on some of the ones, the care and standards for the sheltering. It's not as inclusive as what you'd requested, but there's the areas that under cruelty, under general requirements for cruelty, it covers an option where, and an animal control officer or a police officer can go in and base cruelty on the totality of circumstances. So if it's 35 degrees out, certain breed dogs are going to freeze to death right away, and certain are going to thrive. So they'll be able to address those lower temperatures a little bit better, I think, under the general cruelty standards and under the general care and or the general requirement standards of care. There's been a lot of discussion about the leash. So what we've got right now is an animal cannot be it can't be on public property without being on a leash, regardless of whether that's specifically posted clearly in every location in the city. It just cannot be unless it's on your private property. And we've got a lot. I walk on the path quite a bit on the weekends, and even the pathway itself is marked leash required. So I think that information's out, or I think the posting's out there, and the general requirement is not voice command, because there are plenty of responsible people that do have voice command over their animals, but that is not all inclusive, and it doesn't cover it all the time. So the attack definition, and Mr. Henley can correct me if I'm wrong, the attack definition is a definition that supports the vicious animal of what a vicious dog is. So if it attacks or bites a person or another animal, that's one piece of it. So the attack isn't the defining characteristic of the dog. That needs to be a definition to support the overall vicious standard. A dog wouldn't be labeled as an attacking dog, it would be vicious. So that would just be one element of that whole package in there. And that, do you have a lined copy of this? Or a numbered copy, I'm sorry? Yeah.
Mine is the one that was before the January 17th, and so attack on that one is 56. But that's the old copy, and I don't.
So on the one that we've got now, it'll be on page 20, and line 902 is where it begins the vicious, and then the different elements of it. And so that attack is just one part, and it's a piece. So it's kind of, it's one piece of what would fall into the vicious element. The permit for the cemetery. I don't know why we wouldn't consider that. The area we know that we're putting the restrictions on, where the leash law doesn't, currently it can be under voice command, that's no longer going to be the issue. So that's why we're looking at expanding dog parks and different options for people in different places of town. And one of the other things was addressed about vets and licensing. When we changed our fee structure, the problem is there's no longer a standard for licensing, because if you recall, and you probably don't because I can't recall the exact numbers, at times license fees are waived. So people would stand to be getting, paying for a license that they normally wouldn't have had to. And then there was problems in the past with collecting license fees from all the different locations where it was being done satellite outside the control of the city, and then other services that might have been attached to an otherwise ordinarily $20 license. So no longer a constant structured fee that we put out there. We allowed some changes in that. And so it's all consolidated up at the animal shelter. And I believe
I believe, too.
Yeah, well, you were hoping for the rest of that sentence? I think that's all I've got to cover right now, and we do specifically, when the gentleman spoke about pit bulls, we will honor another city's court ruling on a vicious animal unless it's only based on a breed. We aren't targeting breeds, we're only targeting behaviors. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm not sure who's first. Vice Mayor Johnson.
I don't think we need a permit process for a cemetery. Just simply put in there that if your dog's on a leash, then it's okay to be in the cemetery. I think that's sufficient enough. And if anybody's keeping time, we're at 1 hour and 14 minutes on this topic. Just point of reference.
Councilman Friel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to reiterate exactly what Councilman Johnson just said. I don't think there needs to be a permit. We should just strike cemetery out of there and allow people to be in there. On another note, with the discussion as far as the bodies of water, we are looking at other areas of the city in which to do dog parks. And I think that during those discussions, if some of those areas do allow us, I'm not necessarily saying, I don't think we should have fast running rivers as part of it, but if we could find areas within the city limits that do have water ponds to them or features to them, maybe we could incorporate the dog parks to allow for those type of areas to where the dogs in fact can be, take advantage of the water. So.
Thank you. Councilman Huber.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not totally certain if this is the correct time, but I'd like to move to make an amendment to this proposed ordinance. Is this the right time and order for that?
Why don't we complete our discussion and then I'll call for amendments, and that might be the appropriate time to address the cemeteries as well. So.
Yeah, and yeah.
Okay. Councilman Bates.
Thank you, Mayor. I do believe it was Mr. Harrison that came up. I didn't catch his name at the beginning, but I think it was about a disabled walking a dog on a leash. I think that's something that we should look into as a part of the service animal. There are those people that have lost a leg or an arm or are in a wheelchair in different circumstances that would benefit from having a dog, and to say they shouldn't because they can't control, though I do agree with they should have to go through the proper training, as in ICN dogs, in order to have that. But I think that is something we should take a look at personally.
Other comments? Mine is the backdrop of all of this, which was, I believe, 720 some odd incidents over a 12-month span. Was that correct, Councilman?
It was just over 6 months, I believe.
6 months. And from my perspective, as someone that treats people who have gone through trauma, a dog bite can change someone's life, and they can be haunted by that for the rest of their lives. And a sizable percentage of those bites, I can't prove this, but I believe in my heart of hearts, a sizable percentage of those attacks took place when a dog was supposedly under voice control. And I don't like the idea of restricting people who have trained their dogs properly. I have no question, sir, Mr. Wales, that you are one of those and that your dog is safe. There is no way for me walking down that trail to know whether your dog is safe or not, because it could be one of the ones that isn't. And some of the incidents that we're aware of have been truly traumatic for people. And I know there are people that just don't feel safe walking on their own sidewalks. One of the issues that Councilman Huber has brought up is the issue of dogs in the front yard that are not tethered. And people say, well, my dog has never left the yard. My dog has never attacked anyone. If I'm walking by your house, I don't know that. All I see is a dog that's loose. And so I am strongly in favor of requiring leashes, but I do believe we have a responsibility, as Councilman Friel has noted, to provide opportunities for people to exercise their pets without a leash, and we need to push in that direction. There will be some cost associated with that, but we also have a lot of dog owners in this community, and so I think those are expenditures that we can justify, and hopefully we can give people a chance to play Frisbee with their dog, play ball with their dog, but do it in a way that doesn't create a safety or even a perception of a safety problem for people. So I am strongly in favor of requiring leashes on the paths and in our parks, and to work seriously to create more options for people to unleash their dogs and be in a place where everyone knows that those are the rules. And I think the other matters that have been discussed are things that we can address on second reading. The cemetery, and I'm not sure what to do about Mr. Harrison's concerns, because the same problem applies, in my opinion. You have someone who's handicapped and has a handicap sticker for their dog. Well, that dog may or may not be under voice control, and you still run the risk of someone being harmed and or a child being harmed, and the person saying, well, I couldn't leash my dog because I have this disability. Well, explain that to the person that got bit. So I'm personally not willing to go down that road. So those are my comments. So amendments. Councilman Hubert.
Mr. Mayor, I would offer the following amendment to paragraph 7B1 on page 2, starting at line 59 here. And this is pretty much in accordance with the way that Mr. Henley had kindly drafted this for me. I would move that we amend the definition to provide that a non-vicious, non-dangerous animal is deemed at large if subpart A, if it is off the owner's property and not leashed or in an enclosed character. That's pretty much the way that the current proposal is. But adding subpart B, if it is on the owner's property and not confined to the extent that the animal cannot leave the boundaries of that property, and then giving examples of confinement are by use of fencing or other secure enclosures or by tethering. I would, in addition to what's on this written proposal, I would add amending paragraph 7B4 to delete the cemetery, so that would read under any circumstances on a city-owned golf course, and then just put a period there and delete or cemetery.
I think we should take those up separately.
Okay, that's fine.
And so would the First Amendment being basically if the dog is in your yard and the dog must be restrained.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Either via tether or fence.
Correct. That's the intent of my motion to amend.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilman Walsh. Discussion. We're just discussing the amendment now.
Yeah. And Mr. Mayor, by means of explaining my position here, I think that you touched very precisely on a great part of it. I've talked to a lot of different people about this, and had a lot of people talk about times where they've walked down the street and had dogs that were on somebody's yard, and the dog comes charging out, either runs out into the street or and presents a danger to the animal. And I'm just as, frankly, I got to tell you, I love dogs, and I'm just as concerned about the safety of the animal as I am about the safety of the people. And I think that it's irresponsible to trust that your dog's not going to, that it's in every circumstance just going to be a good dog and sit there in your yard. If it sees a rabbit, a deer, a turkey, a leaf blowing across the street, that it's not going to have a notion to go chase after it and get itself hurt out there. Also, when you're walking down the street, you don't know. I have no way of knowing if that dog is at home or if it's a stray dog that's just roaming around and happened to find a comfortable yard to lay down in. And so I don't know if what that dog's gonna do, if it's gonna come charging up to me or come charging up to my, to my dog, which is on a leash or whatever. And so I just think it's purely a question of safety, and it's a question of, what people should be able to expect. And I think that when we use our public walkways, we have the right to expect that we're gonna be safe and not gonna have somebody's dog come charging up to me. I love my dogs, but I am a firm believer that the minute that my dog gets loose and is not confined either in my yard or on a leash, that dog immediately becomes a public nuisance. And just that I love it and think it's a great dog doesn't mean that the whole rest of the world is gonna have to love it and think that it's a great dog. That's my reasoning behind proposing this amendment.
Okay. Other comments on the amendment? Councilman Bates.
With all due respect, I understand where Councilman Huber's coming, but I would have to disagree. I like the way it says in the current ordinance. I can walk down my yard or down my street and worry about the same thing with my neighbor, person across the street, whether they're going to jump me or not. We have a city that we are doing an ordinance that's pretty much saying you have to have them on leash. Whether you're downtown, across town, up by the mall, wherever you are. But I guess for me is when I'm sitting on my property and I'm watching people walk by and my dog's just sitting next to me, watching other people walk by. If he goes off my property, sure, he's a nuisance. Sure, he could be considered at large. I have no problem with that. But if he's sitting there behaving, I don't see him needing to be tethered or me having to build a fence to keep him in there. Like I said, I could walk down. I worry about the same thing when I'm walking with my kids around a corner and there's a guy walking, just walking, and it's like, is he gonna snatch? Is he gonna hurt one of my daughters? Is he gonna do something? Do we need to make a law? We do have laws on that, but you can worry yourself to death. I'm not worried about walking and seeing a dog sitting in somebody's yard, so that's my opinion.
Other comments on the amendment? Okay. Are we ready to vote on this amendment then? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
Councilmember Bates voting nay. Motion to amend passes.
And Councilman Huber, you made a second amendment to remove the cemetery from B4.
Paragraph 7 at line 73 of paragraph 7B4, which I would move to amend that so that it would say, under any circumstances on a city-owned golf course, delete the two words or cemetery, so it would just be golf course, period.
Second.
Discussion? Mr. Mayor. Councilman Walsh.
So this particular wording is just a carryover from the ordinances that we've always had there. I wonder if it's a problem anywhere. I mean, I know you don't want your dog to go running around on a golf course, except maybe 9 months out of the year when nobody's golfing. Or if it's on a leash, do they do that? I don't know. I don't golf. I wonder if it's, a vestige from the past that we don't even need to address and strike that whole line. So I guess I'm interested to hear from any of you that golf or have stories on that, but.
I don't think a golf course is an appropriate place for a dog. But I think the amendment is to allow dogs in cemeteries on leash.
We could look at another amendment, a third amendment, if you would like. My comment is it clear that if we remove this, that the dog must be on a leash in the cemetery?
I would think that regular lease provision would apply just as it would anywhere else in the city. I don't know.
Just wanted to make sure that.
Mr. Henley has a different feeling than that. It's certainly not my intention that that we turn the cemetery into a dog park. I don't think that would be appropriate at all.
Do you agree that that's covered?
I would
Mr.
agree.
Henley? Okay.
I would agree, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion, Councilman Friel?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, just on behalf of with the golf course itself, I think if we strike it out of there, even though it's proper etiquette not to walk in front of somebody while they're playing golf, if you take it out of there, you really would have no recourse to tell a person they can't have a dog walking out in front of you on a golf course. So I think just striking cemetery itself out of there would be the proper thing to do.
Any other discussion on the amendment to remove the word cemetery from line 73? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion to amend passes.
See, public hearings do matter. So, okay, any other amendments? Councilman Walsh.
So I don't know if you need to do an amendment when you recognize a typo. Is that just a?
I don't know.
How big's the typo?
Oh, it's minor, but it's sitting right there. So
I think probably we should fix it. Yeah.
Page 7, last line, and it's really insignificant, but if there was, can it just be done administratively, or does that have to be done by a motion? What it says is,
We'll fix it.
lasted not more than 3 days, and we have 5 written next to it.
Okay. And the intent was clearly 3. Okay.
Or 5.
Which one?
No, it's 3. I'm just.
All right. So we'll fix that. Okay. Now we're back to the main ordinance as amended, correct? So we have a motion on the floor and it's been seconded. And we already had our discussion. Any final remarks about the main ordinance?
It's been exactly an hour and a half.
Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion to pass the ordinance as amended passes.
Thank you all. And we will, for everyone's information, for those of you who are not familiar with our process, it requires 2 more readings for us to pass this ordinance. We all have email addresses and phone numbers, and we will also have a public hearing with the next 2 readings. And so you're welcome to come forward in either of the second or third readings to make other suggestions. And we began with Ms. Terrell's remarks, and I will read yours in detail, and we may, as a group, decide to implement some of those changes as well. So that is was not time wasted on your part. Okay? We just need some time to look at them. Okay. Now, moving on. I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the liquor license ordinance. Mr. City Attorney, do you have exhibits, please?
Mr. Mayor, we have one exhibit. Exhibit 1 is correspondence from John Henley to the Casper City Council and J. Carter Napier dated January 9, 2019.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Similar to the previous ordinance that you heard public comment on and reviewed in first reading, we would ask the same for this proposal. You have had the opportunity as well with this proposal to go through a number of the ideas that this suggests and evaluate feedback from the community. The chief has done very good work in terms of working with the retailers in our community and taken their feedback and tried to develop language that would, as closely as possible, meet their needs as well as the needs that staff views council has directed them to capture in this language. Certainly there are 2 primary concepts that are getting a lot of attention, if you will, with regard to the public dialogue and the questions we've received. among a number of other concepts that this ordinance covers. The two primary ones are an idea that would suggest that employees of our liquor license holders not be allowed to imbibe and partake of the alcoholic product while on the job and functioning as an employee of the organization. And certainly, again, that's taken a lot of question and gotten a lot of comment and as near as I can tell, garnered some support as well. The second item, probably more largely discussed, and certainly council had a lot of question regarding, was that of the idea pertaining to over-serving or over-pouring for individuals who are exhibiting clear signs of being intoxicated already. That too has garnered a lot of discussion and conversation, and you'll likely hear some comment on this evening as well. It's our intention, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that tonight would be a night for taking public comment through the public hearing that you've just opened. We would suggest moving into a first reading discussion as well, and considering amendments, and as you mentioned earlier for the other ordinance, 2 readings will proceed, will follow tonight's reading pending your discussion if it should pass.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. At this time, I will ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the liquor license ordinance to please approach the lectern. Is anyone here to speak in favor? We may have questions for him. There's no one here to speak in favor?
I'm going to play the perfect politician today. I'm going to straddle a fence like you've never seen. Introduce myself, Matt Galloway, 4017 West 38th. Another little brief introduction for new city council members. I'm a University of Wyoming graduate with a master's in business administration. I'm a co-owner of El Marco Lanes, Galloway's Pub, the Keg and Cork, and the Gaslight Social. I am also acting president of the Natrona County Liquor Dealers. I had, Mr. Mayor, city council members, I address you correctly. I had written a speech a few months back. That's when we kind of come to the consensus on this after meeting with certain city representatives. At that time, we did have what I considered a consensus through the Natrona County Liquor Dealers. Since then, we've had quite a few jump ship. It's given opportunity for the community to express their opinions to us. So when I speak, I will also be speaking part of this as the president, and then you will hear me refer to the word I, and that will be me referring to my position. So please, I hope I don't convolute those in any way. First and foremost, the Natrona County Liquor Dealers would like to thank Chief McFeeters for working with us through this arduous process. He, as well as us, have always held that working together accomplishes much more than working against one another. We would also like to thank City Manager Cardi Napier, who also was pivotal in the latter part of this process and helped slow the process so some of our issues could be addressed. We do look forward to working with them in the future, and we do think they're doing an amazing job so far. Though we truly did not get the results we had hoped for, we can appreciate the feelings and concerns held by the chief, city manager, and city attorney. With that said, it is with great trepidation that I would be willing to accept these newly proposed ordinances. I'll come back to that in a little bit. It is, as was outlined in my 3-tier system sent to council a few months ago, it will always be the contention of the Natrona County Liquor Dealers. Training staff and educating the consumer heavily outweigh the results of instilling fear, citations, and convicting good people of doing the best job that they can. The Natrona County Liquor Dealers fully understand that overconsumption needs to be addressed, and if the city and its hired and elected representatives alike feel the only way to eradicate or at least address this growing communal problem is with these ordinances, then I am willing to oblige. I truly hope these ordinances will merely be used as deterrents to employees over-serving customers, as well as warnings to consumers to begin drinking more responsibly, but not as a deterrent from drinking outside the home at all. The Natrona County liquor dealers spend multi-millions of dollars in tax money, employ thousands of individuals, single moms, single dads, many people we employ. And trust me, that's what this ordinance, that's who this affects. And help to create a social environment positively impacting Casper, its citizens, and its tourists alike. It is a slippery slope when we begin to give up these rights and can quickly prove contradictory to the vision set forth for a thriving social community. We have been assured on multiple occasions by the chief and city manager alike this will not be used as a tool to discourage individuals from drinking at bars, as well as a deterrent from going out at all. City Manager Napier has graciously reached out to myself to ensure me if this ordinance heads in a direction that is counterproductive to its original intent and truly becomes a hindrance on bars to properly make money, he would stand behind us in making the necessary modifications to prevent this unintended effect. As well, the chief has proven to be a man of his word and shown nothing but the utmost respect and willingness to keep the communication lines between bars and law enforcement open. This dialogue is and will continue to be the catalyst for a greater and safer community. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the incredible outpouring of concern from customers, acquaintances, strangers, friends, a few recently retired council members, and even 5 or 6 highly prominent local lawyers. I'll read
1 minute, Mr. Galloway, unless the council decides to extend, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll read as quickly as I can. These all stem from...
Mr. Galloway,
yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move that we extend the time for Mr. Galloway, because I'm interested in hearing what he says. I don't know how any other council...
We need to suspend the rules, is that correct, Mr. Henley?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
So a motion to suspend the rules, a second. Any discussion as to the length of time?
I promise it won't be more than 5 more, not including questions.
5 more hours, or?
No, this isn't a dog ordinance.
You would motion to, all in favor of giving Mr. Galloway an additional 5 minutes? Please cast your vote. We will suspend the rules so that you can continue.
I'll start that last paragraph over. And this one I added, again, I wrote the one before we'd come, because we had a lot of meetings together, the chief and I, multiple. And that I cannot tell you how valuable that was and how gracious that was of him to do. Rather than constructing this on his own, it's reminiscent of the days that Mr. Friel and I had opportunities to develop, and my father, demerit point systems and things like that. So this end of the paragraph was written more recently because of my encounterments with the public at large. So now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the incredible outpouring of concern from customers, acquaintances, strangers, friends, a few recently retired council members, and even 5 or 6 highly prominent local lawyers. These all stem from being responsible for oneself, to overstepping personal rights, to the most significant being why the individual committing said crime faces no charges, while the innocent individuals serving them, as well as the establishment, face life-altering charges. Many of the lawyers also reminded me laws of this magnitude should be made at state legislature, where dram shop laws have been defeated on numerous occasions. After all, the core of dropping the demerit point system is to mirror state law. So as you can see, I'm really riding a fence here. As much as I do recognize the problem that is in front of us, overconsumption, and it really is truly a problem. Some might even say epidemic when you look at some of these levels that people are blowing when they're getting DUIs. I made reference to the 3-tiered system that I had sent to council members of prior. Unfortunately, some of you newer ones didn't get them, some of you did, and I apologize for that. Essentially what that said was tier 1 is education and training of staff members. And basically that's through the chief and through his systems. Regardless of what the results of this are, we're still going to try to advocate and implement that. We think that that's an incredible part of the process. And that's all the way from educating your servers about how to recognize the problem, how to treat the problem, how to deal with the problem, and how to eradicate the problem. And then step 2 is educating the community at large. The consumer needs educated. People need to understand, and it's been made very clear to me through the chief, more clear than it ever was in my life, the societal impacts. And I think if the society at large and drinkers at large knew that the impacts that it has on the community, it would benefit all those in line. The third tier, which is going to happen hopefully regardless as well, is basically the reallocation of funds from our Safe Ride system going directly to cab systems and funneling those into Lyft and Uber rides. Unfortunately, I'm not throwing stones at any cab services, but they just don't have fleets that are large enough to fulfill the needs in a timely fashion. We have consumers that are waiting upwards of an hour to 2 hours for a ride, and that's just not realistic. They're going to find somewhere other way to get home by that time. So we feel that if we set up a system where we can get them an Uber or a Lyft, the time value will go down significantly, and the safety actually rises exponentially. With Uber and Lyft, you actually have the name of the driver, the make of the car. The cars have actually been passed through certain regulations upon Lyft and Uber that they set, so it actually improves that experience for the consumer as well. So that was my original intent. And then, after meeting, and, the chief, God bless him, I mean, we had probably 8 of them, and he sat and listened to us a lot, and we listened to him a lot. We came to a resolution, and I shook his hand, and I said, I will, if this is what everybody deems necessary, I will accept that, and I will, we'll advocate for it, and we will do what we can to move forward. But again, I wanted to mention that last paragraph because, unfortunately, this was not made very publicly known until those resolutions have been made, and then I've obviously received quite an earful since then, even at the mall and at places that I really didn't quite anticipate getting these earfuls, the grocery store, wherever it may be. With that, I have a couple other points. One last one, I'll just read this as quickly as I can because I know you guys give me a grace period here. And this is refers to the employees consuming on the job. Just to reiterate, I want to make clear that we are all on the same page on this. That also includes managers and owners, which of course the owners didn't like at all. But then it was made clear that it wasn't about necessarily we couldn't drink in our facilities. We couldn't drink if we were acting as an agent. And it was also made clear that that was to excess. They're not going to be there if they see someone, a waitress do a shot, because we cannot monitor that. There's busy nights, I'll have over 20 people on staff. And if you think I can monitor one cocktail waitress at a table, clear from that corner, that snuck a shot with some friends, it's literally impossible. I can't do that. But if they are obviously become overconsumed or become intoxicated, then we do have an issue. That person will probably be terminated anyway. But with that said, these assurances also relate to the overstepping law of owner liquor control. We have been promised this law is not going to prevent us from our constitutional right to drink on our own property, in our own business, and under our own liquor license. Rather, this law is merely to ensure we don't interject ourselves into a legal matter when law enforcement is present within our bar, trying to enforce the law in some shape or fashion. Again, with this ordinance, we proceed with great trepidation and still maintain our constitutional right to legally drink, especially in our own bar or restaurant. But I do respect the fact that if we are acting in a social capacity, we probably shouldn't be interjecting ourselves, and we shouldn't be getting involved in any kind of legal matter with police present. So that as well, I certainly accept. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions. I'm prepared for a lot of things.
Questions for Mr. Galloway?
Sir.
All right, Councilman Bates.
If I may, I have several, so I apologize.
No, that's okay.
First one, I just wanted, I actually want to go to Mr. Henley, if I may, Mayor. Mr. Mayor, you brought up the fact that about the laws regarding that it has been overturned with overconsumption, and what were you saying about the laws?
It's me, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's called dram shop law. It's not necessarily about overconsumption. This is about liability.
Okay.
What that basically entails is if it's proven that I had overserved someone and they go out and get a car wreck and injure someone, that person that's injured could civilly sue me for serving that person. It basically exists in about a 50-50 ratio in the states in the United States of America. Half have them, half don't. But it has been voted down numerous times in our legislation. This is not a dram shop law, thank God. You'd be seeing way more resistance from me because civilly and for insurance purposes, you literally watch about half of the bars in town go under like that.
Okay. So I guess, Mr. Henley, do you know about that with the legislation and it's what he was saying?
Yes, Councilman Bates. He is accurate that the Wyoming legislature has in fact adopted laws that would protect liquor dealers from having liability for car accidents or some type of brawls or personal injuries subsequent to putting people on the streets where they would go and injure themselves or someone else. There's an exception to that, of course, is if they serve minors. If they serve minors and the minors go out and hurt themselves or their friends or other people as they're running through an intersection, then the bar owners, in fact, do have that legal responsibility and liability, and so they would have insurance for that, but they would not have insurance for serving adults in Wyoming.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned at the beginning that you guys were all on board with this ordinance, and then recently, some of the dealers have jumped ship, correct?
Correct, to an extent. You know, to say consensus with our liquor dealer association right now is very loose. Tragically, we have some liquor owners that just aren't showing to meetings. We also have some that have had other issues that they're dealing with. You know, the Cersei's own 4 licenses. They've kind of had their own things going on. And some others, and I'm not going to point fingers, but from what we had that showed, yeah, we had a consensus to a degree. Of course, again, I can't reiterate the word trepidation. And there were some that, you know, still were kind of wavering, but since then I've gotten explicit information that these people just aren't agreeing with it at this point in time. So it would not be fair, no prudent for me to speak on behalf of all liquor dealers, and that's why I interjected the word "I" into those statements.
Understandable. When you guys met the most recent and been talking about it, was Chief McFeeters a part of that, or?
He wasn't the original ones. I acted, and myself and Jim Canellis with the office acted as intermediaries, probably the last 2 or 3 meetings, of which some of those meetings were the city manager, the city attorney, the chief, myself, Jim Canellis, a few other liquor dealers on certain occasions, a few other on others. Yeah, I guess does that answer your question?
Okay.
I kind of lost track where
I was just wondering if when you guys were meeting and people were shifting, if you've invited him to maybe.
Shifting literally happened very recently. Okay. Again, it's because I think because the public became more aware of this. This was not really in the public's eye until it hit some print mediums and obviously television mediums.
Okay. And I'll leave it to this last question. You mentioned that there was past city council lawyers, just people in general that came to you and said, we're not a fan of it.
Sorry.
Am I saying that wrong?
Well, yeah, not necessarily not a fan. Some weren't necessarily even against it, but they just always want to enlighten me of, be careful of this,
okay.
Warn you of this, know that this is a possibility. And then there were some obviously that were blatantly like, it's against Wyoming spirit. You know, I could go on a myriad of things, you know, that have been said.
I guess I've talked to several officers that I've just come in contact, passing by this and that, and I've actually come across with a lot of them that has agreed that this would help with the amount of drinking and problems that they face quite often. But out of all the people that have came and saw you, talked to you and this and that, this is going to sound terrible and I apologize, but has kids, teenagers, little children come to you and tell you what their thoughts on? And the reason why I say that is how many of those parents that go out, drink overly, excessively, is getting drunk, being arrested, put in homes, and those kids are going to YCC, WBI, JDC, and any other facility, foster care, because of it. Have any teenagers, kids approached you or approached any liquor dealers that said, hey, wait a minute, We want you guys to take a look at this honestly.
Truly never. And I think that is, to be honest, it's more systemic than just a one-night overconsumption. Because we got to understand this is a broad brush we're painting with. I think that is a direct result of probably a disease that individual may possess. And I'm not a counselor. I'm not in any way professionally engaged with individuals that I probably would have contact with that. I would certainly obviously entertain the conversation at any point in time, but really my son's about the only teenager I talk to. So yeah, unfortunately, I guess no, but I do appreciate what your point is.
Councilman Friel. Did we get all your questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Okay, Mr. Galloway, I also have a series of questions to ask you. You said you had a three-tiered system. You're talking about education and then getting the word out in the public, and what was the third one?
The reallocation of our safe ride funds. I call it a reallocation, but basically it's broadening what we can utilize those funds for. We've got this money sitting there, and Mr. Reed can attest to that, and it's just, we actually turned down a fundraiser for our safe ride because it's just not moving. We're just sitting at this amount that's a significant amount, and it's just not depleting because it's just not being utilized like it used to be. And we feel like if we could allocate those funds into these Lyft and Uber formats, then we think we could engage with the younger clientele a little bit better. I'll be completely honest, I would feel much more comfortable putting my wife, let's say, in an Uber or Lyft where I can see who the driver is, I know everything about that person, versus putting them into a cab where I probably don't have any clue who's driving that car or what's going on with it.
So that's where I was going to head with this, was Safe Ride itself, and obviously if Mr. Reed comes up, I'll ask the same questions, but Safe Ride is not being utilized now, or?
We're still using it and we're still promoting it, but it's just not, it's not what it used to be, tragically.
Okay, so more promotion of that, or as you have said, moving it over to Uber or Lyft. Obviously, using that is going to cut down on potential DUIs.
We think so, and we certainly want to see. It's been brought to our attention, these spikes that we're seeing. And whether that's more police enforcement or patrol, it doesn't matter. Because you can point the finger at that all you want, but ultimately, if you catch someone, it's happening. So I don't care if he's got 5 times the police enforcement out there catching DUIs. Regardless, they're out there, and we need to get them off the streets. So whatever we can do to eradicate that, we're on board. And we think if we can get this younger generation in these lifts, in these things like that, and say, hey, it's a free ride, put your keys away, give your keys to us, whatever it may be, we think we can help bring these numbers down. Because let's face it, that's a real problem. We don't want to see that as bar owners, as a member of society, as a father.
And I would agree with that. I would say that that's the original intent of setting up Safe Ride in the first place, was not have people get behind the wheel. On the education piece itself, now, you and I both know that in our discussions years ago, tips training, everybody was against that. Nobody wanted to put their employees through that. You in particular, for the establishments that you own, how often are people taking tips training, or how many of your employees have gone through that?
All of them, unless they've been hired within the last 3 to probably 4 months. We back check that all the time.
Okay.
It used to be part of the demerit point system, so it's something just in my brain that I just do instinctively, because it was something we'd set up in the demerit point system, so I obviously do that. I can tell you without a doubt the educational process that the chief provided, and he only did it for the gaslight of my bars, is profoundly more beneficial than TIPS is. TIPS is great. It's a good starting point. It kind of covers, it's a blankets the whole situations across the board. But what the chief offers is a real eye-opener. It really, I'll tell you, I watched changes occur in my staff. Is it a perfect thing right now? It absolutely, it's not. But is it better? 100%.
Okay. And then approximately how many employees would you say you have?
At all places?
At all places.
Oh, goodness. 130, 140, and I run light. If you talk to somebody like Johnny Johnson, he'll run 80 deep in one bar/restaurant. I have more people that are what I consider career. employees, they'll work a 40-hour shift versus, just working 15-hour shifts. But yeah, and that's just in my 3 establishments, we're talking probably 130 easy.
Okay, and is there any way of putting a number to across the board? And I guess I ask you this as president of the,
No, honestly, and I probably could, do some research and get that. I can 100% assure you it's well into the thousands.
okay, and then one other question I would just have when it comes to over services, I guess the main question I have, is it common that, would you commonly have clients come up to, or customers come up to your bar and to the bar itself? So they could be in any 3 of your establishments and procure drinks, more than 2 at a time, or 2 at a time, and take them back to a table and give them to somebody else?
Oh, for sure.
And how often would you say that?
Regularly, especially, for instance, in the Gaslight, especially when we have like a concert or something like that. We're what we call bar heavy, not server heavy. It's a term that we use in the industry, meaning on a night at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, if I have a band, I'll have 12 bartenders on duty, and I may only have 2 or 3 servers out there, because it becomes just incredibly difficult for them to get the order, get back, get the drinks, and get back through the crowd and get to where that consumer is. So we have what's called bar service. It would be basically similar to if you went to the event center or somewhere like that, or a concert anywhere else, where it just becomes a little more difficult for a server to perform their duties. So of course, they do that. At that point in time, though, if it's ever at that, with that regard, we have doormen, so we can be assured that everybody within the infrastructure is of age. If it's at daytime or any time when we don't have someone at the door, if they order more than 1 drink, they're required to see an ID for every drink that's going out. We do the same thing at the bowling alley. If someone orders a pitcher and wants 4 glasses, the first thing that comes out of the mouth is we need 4 IDs. And so they have to come up and procure those glasses individually.
Okay.
I hope I answered your question.
You did.
Okay.
That's all the questions I have.
Other question, Councilman Huber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Galloway, what I'm particularly concerned about is the dram shop liability. And you correctly noted that the Wyoming State Legislature has on several occasions declined to establish dram shop liability in the state of Wyoming. What I would ask is if you, either as a representative of your establishments or as a representative of the Liquor Dealers Association, do you guys have any concerns that any of the provisions in this proposed ordinance, for instance, the one talking about serving obviously intoxicated patrons, that in any manner might erode the dram shop law as it currently exists in the state of Wyoming? I'm asking you for a little bit of a legal opinion, and frankly, I'm going to also ask
ironically,
the same question to Mr. Henley, but I want to know what your thoughts are.
Major concern, major, one of the biggest concerns we brought up from the get-go on this, absolutely. Because if it opens up liability with that regard, because when the city statutes are not mirroring your state law, it can convolute things and ultimately really, as lawyers can do, kind of peel that apart. I did bring it up at a meeting with the city attorney. He correctly said, I can't speak as your lawyer. I can't speak as a lawyer for yourself personally or anything like that. He obviously is here to represent the city, but did kind of allude to the fact that he thinks state statute would preside, or I guess if that's the correct word, would overrule any city statute. But to this very moment, that is absolutely a major concern I have. I've actually bowl and golf with multiple lawyers, from Scott Ortiz.
Sir, if I might interrupt to
Yeah, sir.
More precisely direct my question, I believe that there's a provision in state statute that says that if for instance, a bar owner, a tavern keeper or whatever, legally serves to someone, then there's no dram shop liability. The argument would then be that, well, you served to somebody that was obviously intoxicated, and therefore you did not legally serve to them.
You just freaked me out. And I'm not joking, like literally, I've got some words for my friends, I'll tell you that.
Right to the
I've never heard it put like that, and that is incredibly concerning. And that would be Yeah, I guess I don't have a comment that would be alarming and concerning. I mean, I'm already dealing with one of our buildings with insurance and the rising costs that it can occur from one instance. That was out of
I
control.
might suggest that it might be a good idea for you to consult with a good attorney and probably be a good investment of some money to get some good solid legal advice on that. But I just wondered if you had done that, if you had any thoughts other than just being worried about it, and I didn't mean to play.
No, and I talked to him. Like I said, I bowl with 2 lawyers literally on a weekly basis, and they kept reiterating the fact that state statute should supersede.
Well, the statute.
But they never thought of it. I guess shame on them, and of course they probably didn't delve into it thoroughly enough, and I didn't procure them or their services.
Well, that's a theory that worries me, and I just wanted to bounce that out to you. But I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Galloway? Mine is, one of the arguments for shifting the responsibility from the patron to the server, which is a very, I don't think we can overestimate the significance of that change, is that servers under current ordinance might see someone who's inebriated and wants to keep drinking. And they know that it's not good for that person, it's creating a risk, but that trying to cut them off could be very difficult because the person's drunk. And that this ordinance would give them the backing to go to that person and say, I can't give you any more. If I do, it's on me and I could be fined. And make it easier for the server to do what they, I guess, would know that they really should do and have some standing behind that. That's an argument that's been made. Do you think that that's something that's real, or is that just kind of a hypothetical thing?
Again, going back to talking out both sides of my mouth, no, I think that's a legitimate thing. I keep reiterating to it, but when we actually did the class with the chief about overconsumption, societal impacts, and all these other things, that, obviously it wasn't all about overconsumption, but a great deal was. He did a really neat part where he kind of did an open forum where servers and bartenders and a couple of the police officers there would make suggestions on how to curtail these people and without starting a problem by telling them they couldn't drink. And it was anywhere from just bringing them water without them asking, from food, from privately telling them, hey, we're going to just slow you down a little bit, or just doing it without them knowing it, to some really drastic things like not putting alcohol in their drink, which I would never condone because that's actually that's criminal as far as I'm concerned. So to answer your question, of course that would give more teeth in that bite. It would really be helpful for them to pass the buck along, to say, hey, it's not being a jerk, it's the law. Unfortunately, I don't know that there's any right answer to deal with that situation. And I've come up with some things myself personally, in the interim of this, in preparation. We've, changed a lot of policies and really tried to address it because I think it needs to be addressed regardless. And for instance, I have our doorman now. We've trained him to recognize that if there's a group and there's one individual he deems overly intoxicated, he is directly ordered to notify all staff members that person is immediately cut off. So when that group comes in, that guy doesn't even get a drink. He's known at that point in time to be overconsumed. If a group as a whole, as an entirety, has overconsumed, we just don't even allow them in. We literally just did this 2 weeks ago. It was about 8 people. Is that money? Of course it is. But it's not worth, that's blood money. And I don't have that kind of business model where I'm wanting that. So unfortunately, we didn't allow the 8 of them to come in, and where they went, I don't know, but they didn't come in my place. I really kind of didn't answer your question, but.
Well, no, you did. Follow up, when a group of people are at a bar and it gets late, and people have had several rounds, it's common for someone to buy an entire round for the table, right? So, and if one person has clearly been identified by the server as inebriated and no longer to be served, does the training include how to talk to that group and say, guys, you can't be serving them either because that could become a problem for you.
Of course, but
Because the ordinance now says anyone who serves someone who's inebriated, not just a paid server, but possibly another patron, could be cited.
which would be quite the burden of proof. No, I guess training on that would be, border on impossible, but ultimately, what you'd have to word it as, if we catch you drinking again at this point in time, you're gonna be kicked out. You give them one opportunity on that. Because I truly still don't believe if you do cut someone off, that means they need to be kicked out of your bar. Because that person may have spent money in your bar. And they deserve a right to still stay. And I don't think kicking them to the curb is not, now you're becoming society's problem. So I think it does us justice to keep them within our infrastructure. But ultimately you want to make it clear to the people that are with him, hey, this guy's been cut off. If you serve him, you guys are going to possibly be kicked out as well. And I can assure you, generally people don't want to deal with that. There's no right answers in any of this. And that's
I was just curious if
yeah,
that came up
and
with
I want to
that,
be very clear, and that's why I say when I kept reiterating, I accept this because the chief, makes really good arguments towards why this is necessary, and I truly respect his opinion. I respect what he's saying because he's right. There is an issue that needs to be addressed. Is the answer this, or is the answer what I've presented, months back with the 3-tiered system? I can't answer that question for you. I guess the proof will be in the pudding, and there's a lot on your guys' plate to decide.
And I assume that the liquor dealers that are most upset about this, would I be correct in assuming that their problem is it really shouldn't be the responsibility of the server at all? It should always be on the consumer.
Correct. And a lot of them refer to it as the Wyoming way. A lot of our laws reflect that we accept personal responsibility for ourselves. And like I said, and something that's kind of come to mind, I wish I brought up, when we had these meetings with the city representatives and the chief, is I don't like that there's no consequences for the consumer, but there's drastic consequences for the server and the bar owner. Because ultimately what could happen is, borderline sabotage, if you want to get really extreme, but even on the less extreme is why does the consumer care? Because they just don't, there's no consequences. But I'm telling you, when I say drastic consequences, some of my servers, if they have a possibility of losing their job, which, a lot of these establishments, if this becomes law, I can promise you, many bars will make it, if they are caught doing that, they will immediately be terminated. Most bars in town, if you serve a minor, you are terminated on the spot. I am one that actually takes each case by case. I don't have a steadfast rule on that, but these are livelihoods, and these are people that, that need to bring home that, that money to feed their families. So there's a lot involved here.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Galloway? Okay, thank you.
Thank you guys for your time, and again,
Continue wrestling with this, and we may
city
have.
manager and city attorney and the chief.
This is reading number 1.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be back.
Anyone else here to speak in favor of the ordinance? Good evening. You wishing you were up here tonight, Mr. Reed?
No, sir. No, sir. When I saw the dogs were before us, I was really worried. Good evening, Your Honor. Members of the council, Michael Reed, 1615 Luker Drive, Casper. I'm here this evening as one of the owners of Poplar Wine and Spirits and Vintage Fine Wine and Martini Bar. I have a concern. I'm for the ordinance. I have a concern with the ambiguity of the being able to tell if somebody is intoxicated. The way that it reads right now is, for the purpose of this code section, the state of being obviously intoxicated can be described as any combination of facts, information, observations, or indications that would cause a reasonable and prudent person to believe that an individual is obviously impaired. I think it's pretty vague, and maybe it's vague for a reason, I don't know. But I think you're asking someone to make a determination just their determination. So if I decide I don't think you're intoxicated and somebody else decides you are, who's right? That's my concern. I think it's ripe for attorneys to get rich fighting it. So I would like to see maybe something put in that makes it a little clearer. The other thing is, I'd like to know what your implementation strategy is on this. How are you going to implement this? Are you going to do it like you do compliance checks with package stores and send somebody in and see how drunk they can get? Are you going to have an officer in the establishment to double check things? So it's a question that I have. All in all, I think the ordinance is good. I appreciate the chief working on it. I appreciate Carter's input. And Mr. Henley and I spent many phone calls on trying to get some things that were kind of strange in the way you wrote the ordinance originally versus state statute. So we got those out of the way. So those are the two concerns that I have. And I don't think they can probably be addressed tonight, but I'd like somebody to think about them.
Councilman Huber.
I have two questions. How could we make that state of obvious intoxication more clear?
I'm not sure.
Well, neither am I.
So neither am I. So it's got to be a smarter guy than probably you or I.
There are a lot of people that are smarter than me, but
and a lot of people smarter than me too. So yeah. So I'm not sure. So I just asked that question of you.
okay.
It's a good question.
The other question that I would have is the same one that I posed to Mr. Galloway about the dram shop liability. If you have any concerns about this legally serving versus illegally serving, and then that affecting statutory dram shop liability.
I don't think so, because you're not the first municipality to enact these kind of ordinances. Sheridan's had it for some time now, and we haven't had any challenges on the dram shop portion of it. Also, you're talking about, the way that I understand it is it's an illegal sale by the owner. You've got an illegal sale by someone who works for you. It isn't an illegal sale by the owner. So that's kind of how I think it is. I'll be glad to double check it in the morning with Mike Mosier, who's the executive director of the State Liquor Association. And I serve on that board, and I'm actually the governmental affairs officer, so I'll track that down in the morning.
Other questions for Mr. Reed? I was not aware that Sheridan had done something similar. Did they see establishments close because of it just chilled the atmosphere, or whatever the worry would be, or
I
had to fire numerous staff for violating the ordinance?
I don't think they've seen that. I don't know that for sure. I know there was very much concern by the establishment owners. I don't know for sure. I don't think anybody's closed. Has it hurt their business? According to a couple of them that serve on the Liquor Association board, yes, it has. But what that's been, I'm not sure. A couple other quick things, if I could. Matt brought up tips training, and you asked about that. We trained over 2,900 people last year, through the state TIPS program, and that's a combination program between the Liquor Association and the state of Wyoming. There's funded money out of the liquor division for that. We've actually trained 700 of those people on our own without any reimbursement from the liquor division, because there were that many people to train, and it was capped at their liquor division. We got that increased to over 3,000 for this year, and I'm sure that we'll train those. Most of that training is done by Mr. Mosier himself. I think it's a great program if you pay attention. We do cover over serving. The problem is you just got to pay attention to it. I think you had another question, and I can't remember what it was.
I think you answered mine.
Okay.
But thank you.
So, and then the other thing is, when Matt talks about the Natrona County Liquor Dealers Association, it's a very small percentage of the overall liquor licenses in the city of Casper. You probably only have about 16 to 20 members that control probably 35% of the licenses. I guarantee you, if you were to ask most people in the liquor business about this ordinance tonight, they know nothing about it. So I think, and I've had this conversation with the chief, and we've brought this up in our meetings, I think that you need to probably instill in the liquor dealers, in anybody that sells alcohol, I don't care if it's a restaurant, a liquor store, or a bar, that they should pay a little more attention. And you could do that by simply having them all come down here when you renew the licenses or you don't renew their license. You guys are the final authority, and you can make that happen.
And we have a second and third reading, and they certainly can come and testify then.
You got it.
Rather than talk to each other.
The last thing I would say is, in your last public hearing, you said you didn't have a dog problem, you have a people problem. It's the same thing you have here. You don't have an alcohol problem, you have a people problem. And it's people serving and people imbibing. So if we could get everybody to just be more responsible, we wouldn't have these issues. Just my thought.
Well said. Any other questions for Mr.
If
Reed?
I could just ask Mr. Reed one more question. I got to tell you, I'm really alarmed when you say that, in essence, your average liquor dealer out there is unaware of what we're looking at here. And I'm seriously questioning whether or not you think it would be a good idea if we make it a provision in the ordinance that, okay, upon annual renewal of your license, you will do, the following things, one of which is certify to us that you've read the ordinance and the state statutes, but the other is physically come down and appear in front of the council. That's alarming to me. I can't, if I was in a business and there was something like this that was being proposed that, cuts right to the heart and soul of my business, I'd damn sure be down here finding out about it. And I'm not the most conscientious guy in the world. I'm usually pretty carefree about things.
I would guarantee you that most liquor dealers have never read Title 12 and don't know what your ordinances are. That's just my thought. And I can tell you, other than Van and maybe 2 or 3 others, and at Travis back here, you've not seen anybody down here at liquor renewal time. If you've got 87 licenses out there, you ought to have 87 people. I guarantee you the largest package store in Casper doesn't know anything about this.
Sounds like a potential work session topic.
Just bring it up.
Councilman Bates.
If this ordinance was to pass all 3 readings, would you be worried about your business?
No. I operate a different business than Mr. Galloway does. I operate a very small bar. It only has about a capacity of about 70 people. I'm not open till 2 in the morning. So I'm not worried about that. I've got a good staff. On my menus, and I know some of you have been in my place, on my menus we serve a lot of martinis, and martinis can be very deadly. The average martini in our place has about 3 to 3.5 ounces of alcohol in it. You can only have 3 of those, and then you're done. And if you think about that for just a minute, that's about 10.5 ounces of alcohol, between 10.5 and 11 ounces. A fifth of alcohol is 25. So you've drank half a fifth. That's where I'm saying you ought to think about it. We're also making sure those people have water, and we encourage them to have food.
Other questions for Mr. Reed? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else to speak in favor? So we're still on the in favor. Anyone else? Is anyone here to speak in opposition? Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Travis Taylor, 5130 Blackmore. And I'm kind of on the fence also. I'm not against it. I am against parts of it, but I'm for parts of it also. There's a lot of moving parts that we ultimately can't control. And to Mr. Huber's point, I'm deathly afraid of the dram shop part of this. The way that I read it and understand it, it potentially puts us owners right in the crosshairs of many frivolous lawsuits. And I can speak for probably 90% or almost all of us. I don't know about Matt, but we're not looking to be sued. And there's just a lot that I've been through the years as far as that, you know, I have done everything in my control to cover every situation, but there's been people that said they were at your place when they weren't, and I can see a lot of lawsuits coming and that he said, she said, and it's really tough to prove, but we're going to be spending tens of thousands of dollars, right or wrong, just to try to defend our innocence, which is a problem. However, I'm very in favor of our employees not drinking and serving. I've never advocated that, and I'm all for that. One of the things, you know, one of the items when Mr. Peters first started was he said that we're going to put the onus on the server, which once again, I don't have a problem with that. There's only so much training that we can do in preaching and certifications to get people to do what they're supposed to do. And ultimately, if they fail to do that, if I have them sign a contract when they come to work for me and I itemize, you're not going to drink on the job, you're not going to overserve, and if someone becomes intoxicated, you're going to cut them off, give them water, get them an Uber, which we do all these things. However, if they go against the contract the way that it's currently written, I'm still liable. Points are still being put against my license, which I have a problem with that. We still need to hold people accountable for their own actions, and us bar owners should not be the last one standing and nothing happens, like Matt said, to the customer, that they're still grown adults. They still control what they do, and we need to do and will do our end. And I can't, I apologize, I can't speak for everyone, I will, but they still need to be held responsible. But the way this is written in a lot of different ways, there's so many moving parts that we can't control. I've had incidences where we've served a customer one drink and all of a sudden they were on a pill or something and they were in bad shape. So we end up getting them an Uber, getting them a cab. It's happened a few times to where they had one and they totally appeared to be normal, and then all of a sudden we're a liability. So there's a lot of moving parts, and then say there's people that bring in pints and half pints to your establishment where you'll go and clean the bathrooms, and you might have served them one or two drinks, but they've been drinking in the bathroom. They go out to their vehicle and drink, but the way this is written, we're still going to be liable no matter what. And so, yes, I'm extremely fearful. I see a lot of frivolous lawsuits that are out of our control. But I don't want to be misunderstood here.
45 seconds, Mr. Taylor, unless we grant an extension to you as well. But
Sure.
Go ahead.
I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm all for us owners doing our part and our employees doing their part. all the way through training, through serving, through tips, through every part of it. But on the other, you guys are all, common sense says if you read through everything, there's a lot of loose ends here and a lot of liability that still comes directly back on the owner. And, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars for the buildings, for the licenses, through hiring employees we want to do the right thing. And if not, you guys have you have laws and things in place to put points against our license, or if the demerit system's gone now, which I was a huge part of that too, of building that.
I'm going to have to ask you to stop and take questions, okay? Questions for Mr. Taylor?
I'd like to finish finish hearing what he has to say.
Okay. I guess we can go through that again. Would you like to make a motion that we suspend our rules again? Do I have a second? Second from Councilman Huber. All in favor? Please just press your yes switch. Okay. Could you wrap it up in just a couple minutes, please?
Sure. So there's just a lot of moving parts, and as you can read through it, ultimately the owners are still I see, sued, or we're still on the hook at the end of the day, which, we will do everything we can as far as within the rules and to serve responsibly in programming and everything we can, but the way that it's currently written, I'm not agreeing with it.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Taylor? Councilman Bates.
You said that you agree with Matt that the consumer needs to have responsibility, more so than the ones that's distributing the alcohol. How do you propose, how can there be a balance, I guess, between the two of it? If somebody's overly intoxicated, call the police and have them come and arrest them? I mean, what's your opinion, or what's an answer that you have?
Well, the way that that it's reading is we're ultimately responsible with the way that this is written from the time the customer arrives at our establishment until they get home. And there's no responsibility that's being put towards the actual individual. So I'm not saying to come down there and try to discern who's this and that and anything like that. I'm just saying that, everyone's adults and they make decisions, and we shouldn't have to babysit every single part of that transaction. And, I don't know if we need to establish if there's certain individuals that come out and they're a problem and the cops come and we cut them off and then we put them into the system and basically 86 them out of our establishment to show you that we've done our part. But a lot of times too is they could potentially become a liability that we do take care of. And like I stated earlier, some of those, that's not cut and dry. Like there's so many different variables like that we didn't overserve them. They were drinking in their car, they're drinking in the bathroom, but ultimately they become a liability which we take care of and we handle and we try to help them. So that's what I'm saying.
And I understand that you help them, but my question is this ordinance helps protect the servers, but yet also if they're overserving the consumer, it's putting them liable for that issue. But you agree with Matt that everybody needs to take responsibility, including the consumer, but yet there's nothing. How do we fix it? Is what I'm asking. We're just saying, I guess the ordinance, in my opinion, is sitting there saying if a server overserves a person and they get too intoxicated, you know what, we're going to ding that person and say no. Or the person has fall back and say, hey, I can't serve you any longer. You're saying the consumer needs to take responsibility for their actions, and they're not being dinged, or they're not, what am I thinking of? Fined for it. But so where's the balance, I guess?
Yeah, that's my question to you. Where's the balance the way that it's currently written? The balance is it's falling on us, on the server and me. There's no balance on the other side. And I can't give you, I don't know what the answer is, whether you give them a fine or whether we kick them out of the establishment. They go on record as far as in the department, plus documentation on our side to protect ourselves. I don't know what the answer is, but the way that it's written right now, it falls directly on just the server and us, which I think is a problem.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Taylor? Thank you, sir.
Mayor, I have sort of a quick question, and this might be asking you to venture an opinion or a guess that's impossible to do. But, you know, our current ordinance says we got the no smoking business. Do you have a feeling that people are going out, well, I'm gonna go outside and smoke, and then's when they're sneaking out to their car and pounding down extras, or, you know, do you have any feeling at all in that regard? I don't mean to cast aspersions on people that choose to go outside to smoke, but I'd just be curious about your feeling about that.
With my establishment in Evansville, I mean, obviously we can smoke, so everybody smokes inside. And that's a great point that you brought up. I don't see anyone ever doing that as far as using that excuse. I don't see them, they don't hang out in front of the building and smoke in front of it, which I wouldn't allow them anyways to, but no. But they go out there, and we pay attention to it. If a guy's playing pool and he goes out the door a couple times or 2 or 3 times, I'm always telling my people, that guy's, pay attention to him. If he's ordered a drink, or if we'll talk to him and address him, because I have that feeling that he's out there drinking his own stuff and we don't know how much or whatever it is. So, but that's all I can do in that situation. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
One other thing too, to Mike Reed's point is, definitely, it's sad but true, but there's so many accounts that don't even know about this, and we try to get them to meetings. Matt and I call, and we have several people that go around and call and try to get them all there. And, it's futile most of the time, and it is sad, but there is a lot of accounts that need to be aware of potential changes, especially as significant as this is.
We'll do our best to publicize it. We can't make people read the paper or watch the news, but hopefully they'll see what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else here to speak against the ordinance? There being no others to speak for or against, I now call the public hearing closed. Discussion. Oh, excuse me. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance amending Chapter 5.08 of the Casper Municipal Code.
The chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Huber, seconded by Councilman Friel. Discussion. Councilman Walsh.
You know, I think that when we're talking about this ordinance, whether this is the magic bullet or not, there's not going to be one single thing. The old one didn't work. The old demerit system didn't work. You just couldn't accrue enough points to ever have a problem. So when there was an issue, a bad actor in a bar, it was always brought before the council. Council pulled their license or set restrictions on them where they wouldn't be able to continue to work. This is just a part of it. Now, understand the change of not overselling. I think the problem with the over-service to somebody obviously intoxicated is the idea that it may be abused, because I don't think anybody responsibly wants to just keep getting somebody terribly drunk. So my suspicion is that could it be abused, and how will that negatively affect you? It could be. I don't think that's going to be the way that this is used. I don't see stings going on where they go in and see if, I can't even fathom a sting going on where they go in to see if how drunk they can get and see what happens. I suspect that clause in the law would only be used if something obvious were going on and it was occurring right in front of a call or an officer that was there on a call, but having to make the judgment call on who's obviously impaired. I used to do that pretty regularly. It's not vague to me. And one of the frustrating things, this Wyoming way, everything that's dangerous, contrary to good society, always gets labeled with this Wyoming way thing. But it doesn't say personal responsibility. And what we've been hearing here is personal responsibility. It extends both directions. And that personal responsibility, you know, they can be arrested for public intox, semi-public place, causing a problem. Person that's drunk can be kicked out and arrested, which would be preferable to DUI and harming somebody. So like I said, I don't think this is a magic bullet. I don't know that we need to make formal action on approval of using Uber or Lyft for the Safe Ride stuff, but if we did, I'd be in favor of doing that, but I don't think we need to do that here. So I'm going to support it. Just like you've said, Carter, if this starts to be used outside the intent, we can address that as well.
Vice Mayor Johnson. A couple of things. What about the event center in Hogadon? Does the city have liability when they're overserved at those establishments, being the owners of those establishments? Could that liability fall on the city? Could we be sued?
And or the golf course too.
And the golf course. It's just one thing to think about. I don't need one right now. I just want for people to think about. Do we go after the cashier at Rocky Mountain Discount Sports for selling a murder weapon? What if somebody goes to a liquor store and buys a 24-pack of beer and drinks all of it and then goes out and does something stupid? Is that over-serving? I think employees drinking on a job should be a business decision. Obviously, I personally wouldn't let employees drink, but I think that's up to the bar owner themselves. And then again, as you brought up earlier in the work session, what about private house parties? Does the homeowner have liability over serving somebody at a private house party? So I don't support putting that liability on the bar owners or waitress or bartender or waiter at all. I think it's a little overreaching.
Councilman Frew.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to reiterate it. My question was the same thing. What about city-owned facilities if somebody gets drunk out on the golf course or is, and I'll bring it back, I guess, full circle. You look at the event center, you might have a concert up there and they can go up and buy 2 drinks at a time. If somebody buys 2 drinks and takes it back and continues to feed their friend alcohol and they get drunk to a point and then maybe the friend leaves, you know, who's responsible then? And who are we going after then? I get it, the person can most certainly be arrested for public intox, but at the same time, I'm sure if Mr. Galloway said the same thing, it happens in their bar all the time. They don't have enough servers to help everybody, and yeah, people buy more than 1 drink, and they go back and they feed their friends at the table. They'd be responsible, but at the same time, is somebody else going to be responsible inside that bar? I think that it's putting way too much on the bar itself. There needs to be responsibility on both sides both sides have to. The bars have to know when to say when, but so do the people that are drinking themselves. In reference to employees drinking inside the bar, I agree if they're working, probably shouldn't be. But at the same time, if you're an owner of a bar, and I'm just going to throw this out there, I mean, if you're an owner of a bar, and if you're in there and you're drinking and you get to a point that you're intoxicated and then something happens, and your first reaction is going to be to get involved in the middle of that. To say that you shouldn't be intoxicated in your bar, I'm pretty sure it means that, I mean, I don't think Mr. Galloway's, and no offense to either one of you, but I don't think Mr. Galloway's gonna go over to Travis's bar and drink. He'd rather spend his money in his own bar. And so for us to say that you shouldn't be able to do that, you never know. I mean, he could sit in his bar, he could drink, he could get intoxicated, and if something happens, I mean, it would almost be like you being at home and something happens at home. You're not just gonna sit back because you're intoxicated and let it happen. You're gonna react to it. Should he be fined because he reacted to something when he maybe just spending a casual Sunday night up there? So I'm in favor of the ordinance, or the change of the ordinance from the demerit system. I don't think that we've been down that road, and that demerit system just absolutely did not, even after all the changes that we made. I mean, there were some good things that come of it. I see that you kept in putting on the doors, no open alcoholic beverages beyond this point, the open container law. I'm glad to see some of that stuff stayed in there. So I'm in favor of the overall change, but those two in particular, I'm not a fan of.
Councilwoman Lutz.
I agree very much with Councilman Johnson. A lot of the discussions I've had with constituents, bar owners, friends, whoever it may be, if you or I went to a bar and had a couple money drinks, you're like, whew, I need to call a cab. Is your first reaction going to be like, it is definitely that bartender's fault for giving me 4 of those drinks, even though I'm a coherent adult and I'm responsible for my actions? If I'm 400 pounds and I go to McDonald's and ask for 14 Big Macs, are they going to look at me and be like, you're going to die, lady? I mean, the responsibility is on the consumer. I mean, the problem, the term over-serving is insinuating that it's the bar's fault that people come there and get drunk. It's overconsumption. I definitely think, especially, I mean, what if this is a bartender that just got hired 2 weeks ago? They've maybe been through the tips training, they've done this. They're going to be afraid to even do their job because they don't know. As a police officer, you're trained to a very high level to be able to identify if somebody's intoxicated, regardless of how ambiguous a definition on paper is. But somebody who's been working for 2 weeks and has had maybe a little bit of tips training, they don't have that high level of knowledge or background to make that unless it's very black and white and clear to them what intoxicated is defined as. I think there's a lot of really great parts of this ordinance, but I think the over-serving thing is, I just don't know that it's a road that we want to go down.
Anyone else? Councilman Hubert.
I think that, first of all, and I appreciate Councilman Lutz, what you're saying about, comments about food and that kind of thing. What we really need to realize is that alcohol has always been treated different from virtually any other commodity. There's always been all kinds of regulation. We've got all kinds of regulations about, licensing alcohol stores and that stuff that we don't have for people that sell Big Macs and that kind of thing. So we kind of start out from that point of departure, and I think we need to recognize that you don't, you can eat your 14 Big Macs. You're not going to go out and get into your car and run the risk of hurting somebody in that. So alcohol is kind of a special category of a commodity that way. And the other thing, I think that it is important that people that are in that business do bear a different responsibility than people that are selling Big Macs. And I've always advocated that I think it's a good deal when you're there and the first drink or 2 drinks or so that you want in a bar, bam, bam, that server should be right there with it. But after that, excuse me, sir, I'm busy over here. I'll get to you in just a minute. Good servers do that. And when good servers do that, they are doing a great service to their establishment, to the public, and to the consumer that's in there. And I very much believe in that. I'm not really fond of the idea of making these guys into outlaws if they feed you too much beer or something. But I can live with that. But I do think it's important that we start out realizing that alcohol is a different commodity and always has been.
Thank you. Anyone else? For me, because I've been conflicted about this, just as I think everyone on this council is, I'm going back to the task that we gave Chief McFeeters when he first arrived, and we said, we realize, as several have noted here, that our demerit system is not working. Would you please give us an alternative? And he did. I think for me, we're not trying to, I don't want to create an atmosphere of fear, an atmosphere where people don't feel like they can do their jobs or don't even want to do the job anymore because they're going to get caught. I think for me, the real thinking behind this is to try to change the norms a little bit, so that not just the servers but the patrons kind of go to the bar with the understanding that there is a point where it's too much, and there are some external constraints that will be applied. And you don't want to be that person that gets cut off because it's embarrassing, and it just takes the fun out of going. And so that people would hopefully self-monitor and use less. I mean, the reality is people go to the bars to enjoy the company of their friends, but also to get high. That's what people do at bars. I think I'm going to support it, but I want to see how it goes. And as Councilman Walsh and City Manager Napier have said, we need to pay attention to what happens. And if we see establishments closing right and left, if we hear that servers are just can't really enjoy their work anymore because they're constantly looking over their shoulder or afraid they're going to get caught over serving, that's a problem. But I think the more likely scenario is that the people who are going to the bar to just get flat out drunk and have somebody drive them home are just going to have a different bar experience. And maybe Mr. Galloway and his colleagues will make a few less dollars off that person, but I'm certain that's not their concern. And they would instead be pleased to be able to say, this small group of people who are going to the bars to just get plastered are going to go now with a different expectation of what that experience is going to be, and they're simply not going to drink as much. And so I want to see if that happens. So I'm going to vote for it. I do it with some hesitation because Councilman Johnson's points are valid, and there is a shifting of responsibility here, but there isn't really an easy way to sanction someone who's drinking too much unless they get in a car. So I'm going to vote for it, but I think we have a responsibility to watch carefully to see what happens. And I do appreciate all the work that Chief McFeeters put into this, and I appreciate Mr. Galloway and his group and how they have tried to be open-minded about this, knowing that this is a major change. And if Councilman Huber's concerns about the liabilities have some verification, that would be another cause for us to rethink this. And Mr. Henley, maybe you'll have a comment on this, maybe for us at our work session next time, if you could do that. So I'm going to vote yes. So, any other discussion? Any amendments? I have one. I would like to amend, Councilman Johnson alluded to this, I would like to amend line 1228. And on line 1228, let me get to it here. Okay, almost there. it says, no person, whether a licensee, the licensee's employee or agent, or other person shall sell, serve, give, or deliver, or aid in the sale, et cetera, et cetera. And my amendment would be to insert the words on the premises of a licensed establishment. Between the word, let's see, where is it again? Between the word person and the word who. So the way it would read would be service, delivery, or procurement of malt or alcoholic beverages on the premises of a licensed establishment to any person. Basically to say, if you serve someone in your private home, you cannot be cited for over-serving.
I'll second that for the purpose of discussion.
So that you could only be cited if the server was providing alcohol on the premises of a licensed establishment. Discussion. Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would urge you to reconsider if, and I don't know what the current stats are, it used to be that about 50% of the problems we had with people out and about stemmed from private residences and that kind of thing. And so if you picture not only the Christmas party that you might be having at your house, but that one guy that's every weekend basically running a bottle club, creating bigger problems than any of the bar owners do. So you've got the conventional parties that people typically go to, but then you have some serious and ongoing locations that don't really fall outside the law but cause significant problems.
Okay. Other comments? I think Councilman Huber and then Vice Mayor Johnson.
Mr. Mayor, and this isn't so much a comment as it is a question to Mr. Henley. Is there anything in this current proposed ordinance that limits the ordinance to retail establishments, public places versus private places?
No, actually, I think Councilman Huber, in our last work session, we discussed this provision that Mayor Powell has seeking to amend, and it was pretty clear in the discussion there that this provision with respect to over-serving would apply to private residences. A lot of the provisions, of course, are self-limiting if you're talking about licensed people and the provisions as to how they obtain their licenses, how they reapply for their licenses, transfer their licenses. Obviously, those provisions wouldn't affect private residences. But as to this particular provision that is the subject of Mayor Powell's amendment, I do believe that the way it is written, and certainly based upon our discussion at the last work session, this was intended, in fact, to be beyond the purview of just licensed establishments, but for homes as well. And that's, I think, why Mayor Powell is trying to limit it and bring it back just to the licensed areas.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
I think I like where you're going with this, but I think this would motivate people to just leave the bar and go to someone's house and get drunk. And then it really doesn't solve anything. That's just my opinion on it.
Well, go ahead, Councilwoman.
My concern with changing it to say that it's just on the premises of a licensed establishment is, do we or do we not have an overconsumption problem? And if we're going to say that homes are exempted from it, do we have the statistics backing up that the overconsumption problem is absolutely only because of bars over-serving? So I guess to me, that kind of sends a mixed message of, it almost insinuates that it's just licensed establishments that are the issue with overconsumption.
That's not my intent.
No.
My intent is to say that a homeowner hasn't gone through a TIPS training, may or may not have any knowledge at all of, what the consumption pattern has been in their home. And as others have said, they may have come to their home already under the influence. And so I thought it was appropriate to restrict it to the licensed establishments that we license. We don't license homes. So, Vice Mayor Johnson.
I mean, a good way to cure this is just quit blaming everybody else and hold a person individually responsible.
Any other discussion on the amendment as I proposed?
Councilman Johnson, what you just said.
I said that we could put the liability on the individual and quit blaming everybody else. The entire ordinance is what I'm getting at.
Okay.
So, but the only thing on the table now is the amendment. So if there's no other discussion, please cast your vote on the amendment. Didn't do very well. Okay.
Motion to amend fails.
The motion to amend failed.
Mr. Mayor, and I think that under our rules that we're allowed to explain our vote, I voted no on this, but I very well might be amenable to reconsidering it upon further thought. My mind's not closed on that, but
This is reading one. Okay, any other amendments? If there are no other amendments, the original ordinance is on the floor. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With council members Johnson and Lutz voting nay, motion on first reading passes.
Okay, thank you. The council will now discuss the ordinance for the Elkhorn Village Edition. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance approving a replat, subdivision agreement, and zone change for the Elkhorn Village Edition subdivision in the city of Casper, Wyoming.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Walsh and seconded by, I'm not sure, Councilman Pacheco. Council will now listen to public comment. Is anyone here to speak on the Elkhorn Village Edition? Doesn't look like it. Any discussion amongst the council? Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
Please read the consent resolutions
Item
by
10.
title only.
Item 10A1, a resolution authorizing a contract for professional services with CH2M Hill Engineers, Inc. for engineering services related to development of a business plan for the Casper Public Utilities Division. Item 10A2, a resolution authorizing an agreement with Playground Hound LLC doing business as Lucky Dog Recreation for the 2019 Playground Equipment Improvements Project. Item 10A3, a resolution authorizing a final acceptance certificate with the Wyoming Department of Transportation for the Robertson Road South Pathway. And item 10A4, a resolution authorizing change order number 4 with Andreen Hunt Construction, Inc. for the Casper Zone 3 Water System Improvements Project.
Chair would entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolutions just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Friel. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
Please read the consent minute action titles.
Item 11A1, the application for a taxi cab company license for Eagle Cab located at 2804 Coulter Drive. Item 11A2, authorizing and signing the conditional sale agreements for 70 new golf cars and 3 Yamaha golf cars from Masick Golf Car Company, Gary, Nebraska, for use by the Casper Municipal Golf Course of the Parks and Recreation Department. Item 11A3, authorizing the purchase of 1 new single-axle truck with hydro excavator body from CMI Tico for use by the Water Distribution Division of the Public Services Department. And item 11A4, authorizing appointments to the council's boards and commissions.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent minute action agenda items just read.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Vice Mayor Johnson. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
At this time, we ask council members to bring forward relevant concerns or items of interest. Councilman Pacheco.
Nothing tonight.
Councilman Huber.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I would just note, we spent a fair amount of time tonight on the animal ordinance and on the alcohol ordinance. I think those are both, frankly, they're both a big deal. So I think it's appropriate that we went through those in the detail that we did. And certainly hope that any citizens out there, that they're paying attention to this. And if they have any further input on this, we've got 2 more readings coming up. And so, let us know.
Okay. Councilman Friel.
No, sir. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Johnson.
With the alcohol, I just think we need to be careful on things that we pass. I mean, it's kind of a common theme throughout the country to create criminals where there isn't any crime. And I think this is one of those instances.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Walsh.
Mr. Mayor, I am concerned we have rules that we do not follow. No duplication, 5-minute time limit. I understand allowing Mr. Galloway go because he's a representative of an entire group. But then our second meeting of the month, we threw out our rules. So I would appreciate going back to those. If we would go for a time extension, whoever makes that motion, attach it to a purpose.
Okay.
As a representative of a group or someone who would speak for more than maybe typically one person would. So that we maintain what we say we're going to do, or we pull it down off the wall.
Or criminalize it.
$750 fine, 6 months.
Point taken. I will try to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Although we did have quite a few questions for our speakers, and that always extends the comment period. Councilwoman Lutz. Councilman Bates. I attended several meetings over the past week, but I will report on those during our work session next Tuesday. Our next, speaking of which, the next meetings of the City Council will be a work session to be held at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, January 29, 2019, in the Council's meeting room, and a regular Council meeting to be held at 6 p.m. Tuesday, February 5th, 2019, in the Council chambers. The Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Vice Mayor Johnson, I believe. Please cast your vote. And please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Meeting is adjourned.